Hey everybody, it's me, Chad Anderson, the host of Graymalkin Lane. Graymalkin Lane is a podcast where queer friends and allies gather to discuss and review the original comics from the 1960s. My co-host Heather is not here with me today, but in the podcast, for those of you that have been listening, we've been having lots of discussions right from the beginning about how big of a jerk Professor X is or not. And a couple of weeks ago, we decided to do kind of a wide review of his life. So we've been focusing mostly on the 60s comics. For the purpose of today's podcast, we're going to be covering Professor X's entire publishing history, focusing particularly just on the Marvel 616 universe. So we're not talking about cartoon versions or movie versions, but just Professor X as he exists in the comic books. I have some incredible comic book podcasting and art professionals with us today. I'm so thrilled to have everybody here. We're going to have some really nerdy discussions about really nerdy things, and then kind of have an unofficial jury where we're voting on how big of a jerk Professor X is or not. Or jerk's not the right word, criminal.
It's complicated.
We'll see how it goes. So for the purpose of today, we're all going to do a quick introduction before we begin, and then I'll do a little biography of Professor X to start us off. So as you guys each introduce yourselves, guys and gals, feel free to give us your name, your gender pronouns, tell us about some of the work you're doing with your own podcasting or art. And then I want to hear you tell me what your favorite Professor X story is, if you had to just choose one comic or one run. Let's go ahead and start with Justin.
Hey everyone, my name's Justin, he, his, him, from the Ex-Wife podcast. I host with my wife. It is one man's elaborate scheme to get his wife into X-Men comics that's working. So every week, bi-weekly, me and my wife, my better half, I try with all my might to get her into the wild ways of X-Men comics. She had never read a single comic in her life previously. And so now we've gone through a decent amount of a base layer of X-Men history. And I'd have to say, if I had to pick out a favorite Professor X story, it would be Uncanny X-Men 161, where we get that backstory with him and Magneto and really find where their friendship comes from and how that started.
Fantastic. Noelle, go next, please.
Hey, I'm Noelle. I host the X-Men Unraveled podcast, and I follow the stories of the X-Men in chronological order, which is a little crazy, but it's a lot of fun. She, her, hers, and probably my favorite Professor X story is the one about Juggernaut being in the Korean War and how that all happens, and kind of leads to some questionable things about Professor X. So I like it because it's pretty interesting.
On Graymalkin, we just recorded the episode about that issue, and it was bizarre going back to reread it from the current perspective. But yes, a lot of fun. Thank you. Brad, go ahead.
Hi. So my name is Bradley. They, them. I do not run a podcast. I am a artist. You'll find me at Knife System on Twitter. My favorite Xavier story, I've got to say, so I'm sort of split into two. One's sort of broad. One of them, I tend to like things that lean into how complicated, like good and bad Xavier tends to be. So one of those is Uncanny 309, In Memory Most Bitter. That's sort of a complicated look at his life so far at that point. It's right after he's turned Magneto's brain off and before Onslaught. And also the current era of Xavier is great. Yeah. Because it leans into good Xavier at his most hopeful and Xavier at his most complicated, and it's good reading.
Yeah, thank you. Derrick, go ahead.
I'm Derrick of 1407 Graymalkin. He, his. I run a YouTube channel where I review the latest X-Men books. It's a thorough and critical way of kind of looking at everything. Right now, I'm working on explaining the X-Men timeline. I've really broken down everything from Uncanny X-Men to X-Men last week.
Wow.
It's good. Yeah, the pandemic's been really good to me. So I think my favorite Xavier story has to be X-Men 57. It was right after Onslaught. And Xavier had Val Cooper had just come to the school, and she's like, "I'm here to arrest Charles Xavier." And all the X-Men like, "No, we're not doing that. No. And then Xavier's like, "No, I called them. I'm turning myself in." And I thought that was a really powerful thing for him to do, because he didn't have to. Nobody knew what was going on. So Xavier, he's complicated, but he's overall a good guy. He's just a person.
Regina.
I'm Regina from House of X podcast. We cover current comics. We do character spotlights. We interview creators and other parts of the fandom, including artists, cosplayers, drag queens, anybody that enjoys reading X-Men comics and sharing their perspectives. I'm she, her, hers, and I'm going to have a split answer as well, like Bradley. X-Men Uncanny, I think it was 297. Is an issue. It's a single issue where Professor Xavier learns how to rollerblade with Jubilee. Really, really cute story. Really shows a lot of Jubilee's empathy. But the other one would be the beginning of Onslaught. And I know a lot of people are polarized about Onslaught, but when we see the pressure that Xavier holds himself under that basically gives birth to Onslaught, that really gave me a lot more sympathy for his character. So I actually really enjoyed at least the very beginning of that whole saga.
And then last but not least, Patrick.
Hey, I'm Patrick, he, him. I manage an Instagram account called Never Ending X-Men, where I've been doing a read through of the entire series. I was a casual X-Men fan for a long time. And then, like a lot of people, I think House of X, Powers of 10 really got me way more into the franchise than before. So over the past year, I read the entire Claremont run, and now I've bounced back to reading the original 60s issues, which has been quite a chore. But I'm really looking forward to getting through that and then picking back up in the 90s and continuing on through to the modern era. I also run a podcast, or co-host a podcast called Every Horror Movie on Netflix, totally unrelated to X-Men, of course, but that's another big creative project of mine. And if you like horror movies, you can check that out at EHMON Cast on any social media. As far as my favorite Xavier story, I guess I'll actually second what Noelle said. I really love that first Juggernaut story. I just love the storytelling device of Juggernaut getting closer and closer, and Xavier slowly revealing more and more about the history between him and Kane. I also really like what Morrison did with Xavier during their run on New X-Men, and kind of the way they played with the good and the evil in Xavier through Cassandra Nova. So yeah, also kind of two-pronged answer for me as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And then, as mentioned earlier, I'm Chad, he, him. My favorite Professor X story, I always try to remember comics during the time I originally read them. So back when I was like a little closeted, quiet teen in the 90s, I usually would pick up my comics the day they came out. I even worked at the comic shop for a while. And I have very strong memories of having a huge reaction to X-Men 25, Volume 2, when he goes and leads the mission up to Avalon and erases Magneto's mind. And I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe they did that. So even though it's problematic, which we'll talk about today, that's still probably my favorite Professor X story. It packed a real punch. But recently we reviewed, Regina was with us on the podcast in Graymalkin. We reviewed Xavier's battle with Lucifer with his little battle tank wheelchair. It was spelunking through the mountains of Europe, which I find pretty delightful as well. So in my current memory, that one comes to the top of my brain. So we clearly have a room full of really talented and dedicated professional nerds here, and I'm so happy you guys are all with me. So thank you for being here. So for today, I'm going to give a brief biography of Professor X, just kind of boiled down. We want to keep in mind when we're reading comics, and I'm always talking about this on the podcast, we have decades worth of history that are meant to happen in, 12 to 15 years, however you slide the time scale. So stories that took place in the 50s or 60s are now supposed to have taken place in the 90s and 2000s. Technology and culture are constantly changing. We also have a ton of retroactive continuity. We have writers that are constantly going back and adding things to the mythos. Most recently, the revelation in House of X and Powers of X about Xavier knowing Moira was a mutant way before the X-Men were formed. and how that influences all the things since. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It kind of fucks with your brain a little bit when you try to stack it all up. We are meant to just enjoy comics and have good stories be told, but kind of for the purpose of today, we're going to treat Xavier as if he was a real character. And I think he's part military general and part elected politician and part very complicated, lonely old man with a very corrupt moral system. And we have to kind of factor all of that in when we put it all together. Without further ado, let me begin with a short biography of Professor X, and then we will talk about what we're going to do here in the trial of Professor X today. So Charles Xavier was born to very rich and very entitled parents. His father, Dr. Brian Xavier, was a geneticist that worked with others doing mutant research. Some of his colleagues would later be revealed to be Mr. Sinister and Destiny. When Charles's mother, Sharon, was pregnant with him, his fetus split into two, and Charles had a twin sister, later known as Cassandra Nova, who tried to kill him in the womb, but he used his telepathic powers in vitro to kill her back. I'm not even putting on that on the list because we can't blame a fetus for defending itself, but still, complicated backstory already.
Cassandra can.
Yeah, right.
He was a baby fighting for survival. We'll give him that one for free. We learned that Mr. Sinister experimented on Charles a bit when he was a boy, which couldn't have had great long-term effects, but we haven't really explored the ramifications of that. When Charles was 9 or so, his dad died in an accident at work, and his father's colleague, Dr. Kurt Marco, moved in on Sharon, Charles's mom, with his eye on her riches. In order to kind of protect Charles, Sharon married Kurt, and Kurt soon became abusive, a trait which also extended to Kurt's son and Charles's stepbrother, Cain Marco, who later became the Juggernaut. Sharon started drinking. She later died in unrevealed circumstances, leaving all of the family's riches to her husband, Kurt. But soon after that, Kurt died as well in a bizarre explosion kind of caused by young Cain Marco. And Charles Xavier was left with all of the family riches at a very young age and kind of slowly developing superpowers. We have to consider the impact of childhood trauma, said your therapist co-host, because that's what I do for a living as we go through all this. Charles' powers developed more and more. He went bald. He became a huge telepath. And early on, he got degrees in and doctorates from Columbia and Oxford in genetics, biophysics, psychology, anthropology, and psychiatry. And we do have images of him using his brain to get ahead as an athlete and a student, using telepathic powers to kind of figure out how to get ahead. We wonder how much that affected his ability to get 5 doctorates. I'm not sure, but still quite an impressive resume in school. Xavier used his telepathy often to read minds. He would do things like discover state secrets, including finding out about the existence of the Sentinel program when it was still supposed to be secret. At a certain point, he began working with the FBI. His point man was Fred Duncan, in order to get intel on mutants that the government was keeping an eye on. Fast forwarding through some things, but he ended up meeting Moira Kinross,
Lady Moira.
Yeah.
Moira Kinross, who we would later discover is a mutant who has the power to live her life over and over again in different timelines, with the same people making different choices in each one. So she has a wealth of information, but we don't know that for a really long time. So she's lived in a lot of versions. She knows all the people. She knows their main motivations. She's lived entire futures with Apocalypse and Magneto and Charles Xavier and other realities. Wanting to change events that she'd seen in other worlds, we've learned recently that Moira allowed Charles to read her mind, which gave him access to a lot of the information from what she'd seen in other worlds. And this info helped him determine his future paths based on the decisions he's making in order to try to avoid a lot of the dark turns that these other futures took. So another interesting piece when you consider the decisions he's made. This likely changed him profoundly, and he soon developed the dream to create a safe world for mutants while successfully integrating them into humanity. So protecting humans, protecting mutants at the same time. Charles and Moira fell in love for a time, but he went off to join the military. His stepbrother became the juggernaut during that time. Cain was buried in tons of rubble for like years and years where he stayed. And so far as we know, Xavier did not try anything to get him out. But again, we'll give him a pass on that one. He maybe assumed that his brother was dead, who knows? So that's another one we did not include in the trial list today. Xavier also went a lot of trauma as a soldier when he was fighting in what we then called the Korean War. In the Marvel Comics, now it's called the Sin Kong War. He experienced the deaths of soldiers telepathically. He saw a lot of really terrible things happen. So again, great amounts of PTSD. While traveling abroad, he was assaulted by the Shadow King in Egypt, and he left that encounter with the realization that while he had a duty to give mutants good lives, he also needed to protect the public from so-called evil mutants. In Israel, he met Holocaust survivors, including one named Magnus, who would later be known as Magneto or Eric Lenscher, although his real name is Max Eisenhart. And he also met Gabrielle Haller, and she was a mentally ill woman with severe trauma in the hospital. He used his powers to fix her brain, which caused her a different kind of trauma. They dated for a minute. She got pregnant, but she kept the baby a secret from him for many years. So he fathered a child named David Haller, who he wouldn't learn about for a long time. This child would also come back in time at one point and try to murder him, it complicated all kinds of stories, launching the Age of Apocalypse. So that his son David goes on to become Legion. We will talk about him a little bit today. Xavier traveled the world, soon crossed paths with a dangerous man named Lucifer. During this conflict, Xavier's legs were crushed by a large falling rock, and he wound up paralyzed from the waist down and started permanently using a wheelchair. And when I say permanently, I mean when he's not healed or in a clone body, but usually in a wheelchair. Xavier began designing Cerebro, which is a mutant detecting machine, and he then designed his family's massive mansion in Westchester County, New York, into a formal training facility. Then he started bringing in students. First was Jean Grey. He suppressed her powers in order to keep her protected from her own trauma. He brought in Cyclops, who he kind of saw as his heir, Angel and Iceman and Beast, and then he started the X-Men. So in X-Men #1, we joined them in this mansion during this time. So for the context of today's discussion, there's probably already a ton of comments on that history, and you guys are welcome to share them, of course. But for the context of today's discussion, we see Professor X, for me at least, kind of as a world leader. Particularly now, he's leading a nation. He's the head of a council in a lot of ways, although it's rather democratic. He's also making lots of judgment calls. I like to think of people in the real world that we might hold to that type of standard. And when we think of anyone in the position of power who would have to consider the greater good as they're making decisions, that affect a lot of people. These people all have personal relationships, but they're making judgment calls as military generals or politicians or presidents or dictators that have massive repercussions. We tend to hold these types of people to different moral and ethical standards than we would normally for just standard civilians. With great power comes great responsibility, right? So we have huge reactions to people, even as we mention them. I could toss out the name Barack Obama and the name Donald Trump, and we're all gonna have very different feelings about them. I could toss out the name J. Edgar Hoover or Richard Nixon. We're gonna have very different feelings about them. So some of these names are tremendously polarized. In the comics, we throw names around like Mr. Fantastic and Dr. Doom and the Submariner. And each of these characters has their own complicated histories with complicated judgment calls, and this idea of the greater good from whatever perception you're operating from. So you can use the nerd part of your brain or the political part of your brain as you're making these arguments today. But for the purpose of today's discussion, we brought up 9 different kind of trial points that we're going to review around Professor X. I want each of you, as much as you can, have as many nerdy opinions as you like. Be passionate. Be respectful and kind to each other, obviously. Let's like not name call or anything. But as we do, we have to consider heroic versus villainous. And I do think it's important to try to weigh both perspectives on each of these 9 points. So let's assume he had the best of intentions, and let's assume he had the worst of intentions as we're talking about each one. At the end of each round, the 9, I'm gonna have each of you vote your personal opinion on whether, we're gonna give him a score from 1 to 5 for each one. So on 1 is gonna mean that his actions were completely justified in that category. 2, we've got some moral concern happening. 3, definitely inappropriate. 4, he's a little bit over the line and stepping into criminal behavior. And 5, he's just pure evil. So for each round, we're each going to be voting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Personal votes are fine. It's okay if we disagree. So before we introduce the first topic, anyone who wants to comment on Professor X's history, or anyone who has questions about the voting today? Derrick, go ahead.
Okay, you forgot something in concern with Moira, because when he went out to war, she broke up with him.
True.
And then and left him went out to marry Joe McTaggart. And then later on, when she called him, hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with this kid? She didn't say that it was her kid. She said it was a mutant who needed help. You know. Yeah, you know.
Right. But Moira's kid's not Charles' kid.
Oh, no. Yeah. No, but also happened with Gabrielle too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, she didn't tell him.
Nobody tells him it's his kid.
Yeah.
And he doesn't read their minds, apparently.
A red flag.
Okay. I got you. I already got you. Okay.
Okay. We're gonna get to that one in a minute. Pause for just a second.
Okay.
Any other?
Okay.
Any other comments about the history or questions about the voting? Lots we didn't cover, obviously. There's a lot of history woven. Amelia Vaught, we didn't mention.
Oh, right.
There's a lot of things that we'll get to. But
that was probably his healthiest relationship.
Okay, yeah, so go ahead, Bradley.
I was just saying, I've got to say, the Moira thing, we talked about it some, but it's just like the reaching implications of the Moira retcon are nuts. Yeah. Especially for Charles and Magneto, it undoes and like reforms basically everything that we knew about their history, because she was already pretty entrenched, but the level to which she's sort of been involved in the planning and all of that, it's wild.
But Bradley, it also makes sense, because if you remember, Xavier had this little group called the Mutant Underground, which were basically a bunch of human sympathizers who were helping mutants around the world where he couldn't get to. So like Moira knowing about being involved, I heard the retcon, but like her being like you kind of knew that. Like, she's always.
We knew she was like A+ #1 human ally. It's just the change is significant, especially just to Charles and.
The fact that Eric and Charles were working together secretly. So this whole thing was a stage play of trying to reenact these different activities throughout history.
Yeah, stuff like Onslaught gets.
Yes.
Well, and for all we know, in the new issue next week, it wasn't Xavier, it was a Skrull the whole time. We have to operate on the knowledge that we have for now.
But also you remember, at some point they said in Moira's timeline, Xavier and Magneto had a schism. They stopped talking. So like, when did that happen? Like, there's a lot, like, we need a Moira book. Just saying. Like, I'm sorry.
She is the whole mystery of this era, though. She's the dark horse.
Yeah.
Brilliant storytelling. Okay, so we're going to introduce each of the 9 points. My plan is, and you guys can all talk at any point, but my plan is to have a pro side and an anti side. So if it's okay with you guys, and you're welcome to pass, like on point 1, we'll start with Noelle, actually. On point number 1, I'll have you take the pro Charles Xavier side. Give us some of your thoughts on what works. We'll have someone else take the anti side, and then we can discuss. Does that sound okay for everybody if we just kind of move that format? And if you don't have anything to say, you can just say, and we'll call out somebody else, and that's fine. If you have something you really want to share, again, just give me a hand or a finger, not that finger. let me know that you have something that you'd like to share. Okay, so point number 1 is something we've been talking about in the comics a lot. Imagine you are a telepath with insane levels of power. There was an interesting thing in the most recent X-Men comic book, X-Men #2 of the new run, where Jean Grey talks about using telepathy. It's like a flashlight. You can directly shine it on one mind, or you can kind of turn it to a scope to look over a crowd of people. We see Xavier at times with extraordinarily powerful powers, projecting images around the globe, reading lots of minds, joining minds together. We also see him relatively weak at times, where he can't seem to see into the minds of the person right next to him. So it's an interesting concept, often depending on how the story is being told. But over the years, Xavier has done a number of really concerning things with this power set. He's discovered government secrets and taken action against government programs. When he is fighting particular villains, he's literally just erased their memories or erased their minds completely, in the case of like the Vanisher or Magneto. We also have him affecting the memories of civilians around him pretty frequently. So changing the minds of people so that they didn't see the X-Men, or erasing traumas, or even in the case of Gabrielle Haller, fixing her traumas by telepathically intervening. So we have a lot of really interesting things. We also have the revelation that he brainwashed Wolverine into joining the X-Men at one point. He like changed Wolverine's mind to bring him onto the team. And Bradley brought up X-Men 309. We have an image in the past where Amelia Vaught was not going to ally with him, and he uses his powers to be like, no, you are going to, before changing his mind and letting her go. So we have a number of interesting concepts related to like the ethics or morals of telepathic powers. So let's begin with Noelle, if you're willing. What is the pro Xavier argument as far as his use of telepathic powers?
The pro argument, which is going to be hard for me because I'm not a fan, but he is trying to help mutants, protect people. Maybe he thinks the only way to do that is by manipulating others with his power. It's kind of, his weapon. With certain villains, maybe he thinks that they're going to be following a certain path, causing harm, and there's no way to stop them from doing that. So the only thing to do is, reset them, I guess, as a person. And then with civilians, erasing their memory to try and protect the identities of the mutants who are being persecuted. And then with the government, as far as, he is trying to protect mutants and protect everyone from quote unquote evil mutants. So the best way to do that with his powers is to manipulate their minds.
The government is the easiest of these, just because the government is actively trying to kill them. So take whatever you want from there.
Yeah.
And also with what you said about Vanisher and Blob, you can't really stop the Vanisher. You got to make him, you got to wipe his mind with that, because he could just pop up. You can't, there's no defense. And Blob, you can't really stop him once he gets going. So you don't want to do it, but you have to because you have kids. Yeah. And as far as Beast's family and friends, they were better off not knowing. Hey, the old saying is right. Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Bradley, are you willing to take the anti-Xavier argument here?
Oh, I can do that. Yeah. I think he's incredibly yeah, exactly. I think he's incredibly casual about altering the minds of people rather than trying to just change their minds. Look at when Kitty is first introduced, and her parents are very they do not want to send their kid here with valid reasons. They could maybe be argued with, but Xavier just changes their mind. And then Scott goes like, oh, this is bad. And Jean's like, oh no, we do that all the time. Don't worry about that. So what's also interesting there is not only is he very casual about and cavalier about playing God with people's minds, but he trained another incredibly powerful telepath in very similar behavior. Jean is Jean because of Xavier in the same way that Scott is. And you can't overlook that in terms of his attitude toward his powers.
I was thinking of...
Please go ahead.
Oh, I was thinking of the exact same moment that Bradley just brought up with Kitty, and that extremely offhand way that Jean just kind of explains the whole thing away. I mean, it's one of the weirdly most chilling moments in X-Men to me, because it is such a casual remark that she makes, and Claremont doesn't really tip the scale in that moment. Like you kind of have to form your own judgment on that. And yeah, it is scary, and that's such a good point that he could just talk to people. But it's probably so tempting too when you have his power. Like, you're just accustomed to having it there, and it must be a struggle to some degree to try and decide what to do and to what degree to wield it in any given situation.
Well, that comes up later with it's either Amanda Vaught or Gabrielle Harley that mentions this. I forget which. I think it's Gabrielle that mentions that like they weren't sure after the fact sometimes how much was their own thoughts and how much was Xavier, and there's just no way to be sure. That's, I don't know, that's chilling.
Yeah, I found myself really on the pro side wanting to give some leeway to the fact that if he could prevent something terrible from happening, why wouldn't he do that? Like, if he could and he didn't, then wouldn't that make him complicit in that action? But the number of times that you continue to do that, and the number of times that you make that on you to make that judgment call, really widens the gray area of when and how frequently you're doing it. And I feel like that kind of builds the comfort with the ability that kind of tips the scale to that con side of just doing it a little bit more willy-nilly.
Regina, go ahead.
I think something to consider is, for example, if you compare what Professor Xavier is doing with his powers over his entire history compared to what Empath does with his powers. Like, Empath is a fucking sociopath. Xavier, yes, he does a lot of really terrible shit, but the reasons and the ways that he does it is much less cavalier. So even though, yes, very problematic and probably uses his powers a little bit too casually at times, overall, he hasn't actually let it turn him completely into a monster. Now, this is excluding everything before House of X, Powers of 10, because we don't know what he's currently doing. But up until more recently, even though he always has that temptation to use his powers, because come on, let's admit, if you could do what he does, how far would you go? I used to think I would be very ethical about using telepathic powers. Now I'm like, I'd be a fucking monster.
So
in my life would
can't
be
stop.
sock puppets. Yeah.
I mean, you can have anything that you want, that you still, in that moment when he tries to change Amelia's mind, he has that moment like, shit, I just crossed a line, and he lets her slap the crap out of him. He brings himself up short when he knows he's starting to go too far. Now, does he always do it? No, but he could be far worse than he actually is. Well,
one of the reasons I like, okay, we'll get into how Emma's not done anything wrong on a separate podcast. But one of the things, the reason I like that issue so much, and the reason when the thing with Amelia comes up and he lets her slap the crap out of him, like you mentioned, it's because it's very clearly analogous to a physical abuse scenario, like what he mentions earlier in the issue he watched happen with his mother. I also will say, as I know I'm the anti-Xavier's powers, Xavier's usage of his powers. I think we talked earlier about how you can't discount how much childhood trauma affects you later on in life and how you approach things and your mindset. It is mentioned in that issue as well that like some of his like, not his first post Grant Morrison, but like some early on usage of his powers where he basically reached into his mother's mind after she would get beaten up by Kane and shared her pain. in an attempt to alleviate it. And that kind of, the kind of trauma in just witnessing your mother get beat up is a lot for any kid, let alone literally reaching into her mind and experiencing any portion of it the way she did. That fundamentally would alter the mind of a kid, and I don't know how they approached, whether or not they had powers, how they approached anything the rest of their life.
So let me provide 2 counterpoints and then hear your thoughts. Number 1, Regina, you just brought up empath. So I made a list of evil mind controlling villains with Marvel, and I tried to compare Professor X to them. So empath is one example. Even bigger, we have people like the Shadow King, who just wants to destroy and corrupt everything and use his powers haphazardly. Xavier's certainly not that. We also have characters like the Purple Man, if you guys read Daredevil at all, who just rapes and callously murders people all the time using his powers. Or the Puppet Master, who is a Fantastic Four villain, who like controlled a bunch of super powered characters into becoming like human trafficking victims, basically. I mean, we have some reprehensible stories, including Charles Xavier II, who's the son that Charles has with Mystique that came back from the future, and he's just mind controlling his entire team to like follow his orders all the time. So that's one point. Xavier
What a
does not
disastrous
seem as bad. Xavier does not seem as bad in comparison. But the counterpoint here is if we have someone in a position of power who does, let's say, we'll make it really simple, a cop who is working really hard and taking people off the streets who are going to harm others. But we also discover that he's framed a dozen people in order to arrest them, or he's corrupted justice in a particular way. Do those 10 times that he was evil, does that make the 1,000 times that he did wonderful things okay? Like, how do we stack that up? Because Xavier has done some pretty reprehensible things. And what level of accountability is there for that? So it's kind of an interesting counterpoint. Derrick, go ahead. You had something a second ago.
I was going to say that yes, Xavier's done all that, but he's also created the telepathic ethics that every X-Man that came through his doors followed. Everybody follows those, well, except for Emma. But everybody else.
Even Emma, but for better or worse, still applies.
Yeah, it still applies. But like, Emma doesn't like to listen. You know that. She thinks she's too cute. She thinks, I can do whatever I want.
It's not her fault. She's smarter, prettier, and better than everyone around her.
Still a side chick. Still the side chick. No, yeah. No, but like Charles, like he tries, and it's more. I kind of see it's a kind of like a trial and error, like case by case basis. He doesn't want to, and like he believes in free will. I mean, if he wanted to, he can just go out, use Cerebro, affect every human's mind, and make them love mutants. But he doesn't do that because he believes in free will. Ish.
In your minds, what's the single worst thing in this category that Xavier's done? I'm loving watching all of your brains work.
Not really.
I mean, frankly, this is probably getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but I'm just really concerned about what's going to be revealed about the current era. Just he has been such a sinister presence for this entire House Powers Dawn of X era. And we already know so much that he's done that's fucked up and morally questionable, and Inferno is coming up. Who knows what's coming up after Inferno? And I don't know. I just feel like there's even more alarming revelations to come.
Hey, how are you, Destiny?
Exactly.
All right. Oh, sorry. Real quick with that. With the whole thing with afraid of Xavier because of his mind powers, and now he's actually saying like, yeah, I can do that. Like he's all right. Do you guys ever watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia? There's this one character on there who has this whole thing about like they want to kill us, but they're not going to kill us because of the implication. Mm-hmm. Like that's how Xavier is, and I get it because like he's tried to work with humanity. They tried, and it's like getting punched 9 times in the face. And that last one, like, okay, all right, you're not gonna. No, that's Xavier right now. Like he's taking pride in his powers. He's feeling, he's getting his groove back.
She's feeling herself.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's the interesting thing about this discussion so far, because I feel like I came in feeling fairly anti-Xavier, but I'm really enjoying how we're talking about his powers and just the basic fact of him having those powers, the decisions that causes you to make, and how, relatively speaking, he's made much better decisions than a lot of others who have similar powers. And it actually reminds me, I mean, Chad brought up Trump earlier, and I think about this with Trump sometimes. I'm like, I wish our side had a Trump that had like the same sort of power, but could use it for something good, you know? But then it of course brings up the question, like, are they still actually doing something good if you're, you know, manipulating people and lying to them? And
Tony Stark.
Thanks. What'd you say, Derrick?
Okay, I think the worst thing Xavier has ever actually done with his powers is what he did to Danger, because he knew that Danger was sentient, and he knew that there was a level of intelligence there. He knew that there was a level of agency that could be exercised there, and he basically kept her as a slave. Like,
that was my question. I mean, did he do that with his powers though? Because he's done a lot of reprehensible shit. I don't.
Right. Does his power work over technology in that way, or AI?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
you know, I think this was actually a separate point out of the 9, but I think we could lump it in here actually. So let me tell the story super quick. Xavier designs a training room called the Danger Room for the X-Men, and involves normal technology. But at a certain point, he incorporates Shi'ar, artificial intelligence, and advanced tech to make the room sentient, if you will, and it can create like holographic, or I don't know the right word, solid light projections of, so the X-Men can have like actual training. They can actually be harmed in this place as they fight mock sentinels and supervillains, etc. But when he uploads this new technology, he becomes very aware telepathically that it is sentient. It does not want to be there. It is an artificial intelligence with extraordinary power, and he keeps it captive. He chooses to let it remain there with the idea that in the greater good, I'm training my students, and we need that more than this person needs their freedom. So Regina, when you argue that that's maybe the worst thing he's done, I think the enslavement of Danger certainly qualifies as something that's not really okay. Derrick, go ahead.
Okay, I hear you, but at the same time, no. Okay, where did he get the technology? He got it from the
That's a pro-slavery argument.
No, whoa. Hear me out. Okay, I'm coming to that. Yeah, the black guys for slavery. All right, he got it from the Shi'ar Empire. And what do we know about the Shi'ar Empire? They are aggressive with their manifest destiny policy. So, and he got that after being with Lilandra. They gave him a bunch of technology. I'm pretty sure they didn't tell him how it works. And with Danger, they never said that she did that a bunch of times. She just said she did it one time. And so with that, he could have thought like, oh, what is that? He could have thought it could have been a Sentinel thing. It could have been anything. It freaked him out. And then when he found out later, which we still don't even know, like when did he find out? Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, that's the bad part. But ignorance. And I also blame the Shi'ar. They should have given him a guide, like a manual. So I should have showed him how it works. Like, hey, they're gonna get AI. So like be careful with that.
Here's the manual. If something says help me, you stop. Like,
that could be somebody's safe word. I don't know.
Noelle, go ahead.
And also like Xavier's had so many tech people at that school, Warlock, Forge, Banshee, all people who know how this technology works. And they didn't find anything. And they never said anything about Xavier wiping anybody's mind. So how much can we trust Danger? Because before then, she just convinced a teenager to kill himself. So you can't, like, I trust her, but like, no, I believe her.
I got you.
But I would just want to do a thorough back of what happened. because people lie. People get their things straight.
Regina,
Not slavery.
Noelle, go ahead with your counterpoint.
So first, I would say just because we don't know Professor X was messing with the students' minds doesn't mean that he wasn't doing it. I personally believe that he was always doing that. There's moments where it's implied very heavily that he is. And my thing is, I think that what he did with Danger is very emblematic of what he does with everyone else. Like, Danger is sentient, has agency, and he removes that element of agency from everyone that he uses his powers on. Like, whether they're a villain or not, if they are a villain, he's taking away their chance to grow. And I don't see growth from him in the way that he uses his powers pretty loosely with people's minds. And so the whole thing with Danger is, I think it might be the worst example of him using the powers, but it's related to and very parallel to the way he uses his powers against a lot of other mutants and humans.
And it is difficult. We've been reviewing the early comics, and there seem to be so many elements of him just fucking with his students' minds over and over again. It never outright says it, but it just seems very apparent. There's a lot of him just screwing with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth mentioning that of the 05, the only like two that get out like morally fairly uncomplicated are Iceman and Warren. And that's because there's no brains in there to fuck with.
No, Bradley, no. Iceman got it. He got it the worst because he got out by his friend, which is essentially, she pushed him into the pool, in the deep end of the pool, knowing he can't swim, said like, you'll figure it out.
We'll have the trials of Iceman and Angel another time, but they've actually both done some pretty shitty things too. So returning to that question again, anyone else who wanted to answer, what's the worst thing Xavier's done? Any other answers?
I'm gonna say it's my instinct, because that's a lot of what I was reading, is the turning off Magneto's brain. Anytime you're turning off someone's brain, I'm gonna say that's not good. There's other solutions, and he's done it to varying degrees to a lot of people, and most recently Sabretooth. And I think that'll come back to bite him as well.
Yeah.
No.
And
I don't know. Like the Magneto thing. I remember what you're talking about back in Fatal Attractions.
Yeah.
Magneto was doing too much. He was about to have an EMP that take out all of the technology across the world, and he just seen Magneto rip out Wolverine's skeleton through the skin.
There are other solutions.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, turning off people's brains, like, pretty bad. And how is that different or better than, say, like, just killing someone? Like,
right.
You're turning off their brain. That's pretty intense. That's going really far with your powers. But just because he doesn't kill them, that's better. When if the only solution is to get rid of them, it might be more ethical just to kill them.
Especially when you also have the option with your powers to just change someone's mind.
That too.
Or block a particular memory, right? Like the whole thing. Any other thoughts on the use of telepathy before we vote in this section? Okay, Regina's going to be rejoining us. I'll take her vote. She had a power surge. She'll be right back. She just texted me.
Oh no.
We'll take a vote. I'll take her vote when we get back. So for this section, you each get to vote of your own merit. Don't worry about anybody else's answers. 1, justifiable action. 2, morally concerning. 3, definitely inappropriate. 4, over the line into criminal behavior. 5, irredeemable. What he's done does not make up for the rest. So in the use of his powers, how would you, the jury, vote for Charles Xavier? And I'll write down your answers. Derrick, you first.
I give it a 2. You gotta keep an eye on it.
Justin?
Yeah, I want to say
keep an eye on it.
I want to say 2.5 if I can, but that's kind of where I'm falling in between. It's like on the verge of inappropriate, and is definitely concerning with some of the things that he's done.
Patrick.
I mean, just at a very literal level, I feel like definitely some of the stuff he's done has been criminal for sure, and maybe even verging on pure evil. But because, I mean, obviously so many truly remarkable things have resulted from mutantdom, I'm going to downgrade it to a 3.
Okay.
I'll give him a point.
Brad?
I'm gonna say a solid 3. There's been a lot of good. There's been some real bad.
Yeah.
And Noelle?
I'm gonna go 4. I know that there's good that came from it, but I'm not an ends justify the means type of person, so I gotta go 4.
My answer is also 4, and I feel like that's being very fair. Okay, and while we're at it, we're going to go ahead and vote on the enslavement of danger. So separate category. We already covered the story briefly.
Yeah.
1 through 5 again. How well would you justify middle line or pure evil? 1 through 5. How would you vote? We'll go backwards this time. Noelle?
5.
Brad?
The text is pretty clear on that he knew. 5.
Patrick?
I'll go 5 as well.
And Justin?
5.
And Derrick?
The fact that he knew afterwards, 4.
Okay. It's also a 5 from me. So that one has a little clearer drawing line. Okay, so the next section is a particular event. We have a lot of examples over history of Xavier lying to his students, but this one was a particularly jarring one. Early on in the comics in the 60s, there was a lot of times when Professor X would tell mistruths. He outright lied several times. He manipulated several times. But there was one period of time where he sensed an alien invasion from a species called the Xenox, who had really deadly intentions for Earth. And he believed that he needed to prepare himself for this invasion. So instead of just asking for space or saying, I need some time off to prepare, he faked his own death by having a shapeshifter named the Changeling impersonate him. Changeling was then killed. We later learned Changeling was already dying from a different disease, but he was killed in battle with an obscure villain named Grotesque. Jean Grey's the only one that knows Professor X is alive. She has to keep it a secret from her teammates for weeks into months. And eventually he reveals that he was alive the whole time. So as far as the lies told to his students, this one came across as a pretty strong one, Deadly Genesis being worse, we'll get there. But on this storyline with Changeling and Xenox, any points or counterpoints? So Brad, if you're willing to take the pro side on this argument, let's hear your thoughts.
I will fake my death on any given night out that I want to leave. I invite everyone to fake their death when they want to get away from their friends more often. No, I'm kidding. It's not what you'd call like great healthy behavior, but you know, you feel like you need to cram for an exam and you need to make a bad excuse to leave. Go ahead.
And Patrick, do you want to take the opposite side?
That's funny because this is actually one where I'm more on the pro side.
Well, you're welcome.
The con side, I mean, you know, he lied to everybody. I mean, it's not cool to skip out on your friends and just say, oh, hey, you know, I died. And also you're kind of sort of taking advantage of this guy who comes to you and says he's dying of terminal disease and wants to do some good in his final months. Yeah, can you tell I don't feel strongly about the con side of this one.
Okay.
I actually endorse Xavier in this case.
I will say in the con side, these are effectively your children that you're making, and I mean that it's fairly clear about that he takes sort of a fatherly role with all of them, and you're making them mourn your death when, like, for what?
You're downstairs.
Yeah.
So you can get some quality basement time in.
Yeah.
Once again, I would do that every time.
Anyone who has any strong feelings on this, the story about the Xenox and Changeling's death?
Sorry, Justin.
I think, you know, the fact that he's allowing Changeling to do some good. Changeling was a villain, I believe, before he had come to Xavier. He wanted some redemption. I think this was then retcon later on with 65, X-Men 65, and to kind of, I don't want to say take use of the fact that a dying man's wish, but to also provide him the space to be able to prepare for a earth-shattering, earth-ending event. Yes, there were better ways to handle it. You could have been upfront. You could have just talked to your students and told them, hey, I got something big going on. But that's not what he did. And hindsight's 2020, sure. But I think that in this case, the threat that was coming in and the way that he handled it, I'm on the pro side on this one.
Well, and it's funny. I love the way that the story of how that plays out is told, because it happens in, I think, like literally 2 panels where Changeling is just like, hey, I want to do some good in my final days on this earth. And Xavier's like, oh,
become me.
Convenient. Yeah. He just goes for the absolute top shelf. How about I fake my death and you take over for me?
Had this in my back pocket for a while.
Yeah.
He also just like, it takes nothing to get Xavier to be like, I'm just going to lie to everyone and see how this goes. Like, he's always right there.
I have to wonder, again, I'm going to play the opposite side for just a second. Xavier wants some time off. Maybe he's depressed. And he goes into Changeling's brain and he's like, hey, you're dying. You should come over here and ask for help and then poses me. It'll be a great way to die. And he just like fucks with his brain a little bit. My brain always has to go there with him because he can do that.
Do we know that Changeling was dying? Did Changeling have this diagnosis
He said he was dying.
Before Xavier needed somebody to take his place.
Yeah.
There's part of me constantly wondering if he's the one that just set it all up. I don't know.
Just
Derrick,
dropped that little memory.
I'm actually going con. I'm actually against Xavier on this. Like, so you wanted to take some time off so you can run game theory on your students? Wow. Wow. Like,
are we ready to vote on this one? So again, we're scaling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 being extraordinarily inappropriate, 1 being very innocent. Derrick, how would you vote?
I'm not going to say he was inappropriate, but he was an asshole. So 4.
Okay. Regina.
3.
Justin.
2.
And Patrick.
I'll say 2.
Noelle.
3.
Brad.
Unhealthy, but not criminal. 3.
I'm going to say 2 on this one. I think it can be spun in either way. Regina, I'm going to have you vote on 2 other things while you were briefly gone. What score would you give him for the use of telepathic powers? All that stuff we talked about.
I'm going to give him a 4.
And then the danger storyline?
I'm going to give him a 4.
Okay.
You, Regina. Also, I love your Danny Moonstar. She's been my crush since I was 12. So right there with you.
Thank you.
Okay, so
bad.
next category is kind of an obscure, it's not even a major X-Men story, but it involves Professor X a lot. We learned that he is part of a group called the Illuminati, which even the choice of that name shows the extreme amounts of narcissism and antisocial personality disorder that exist in the whole team. But Professor X is joined with a bunch of influential world leaders like Iron Man, Mr. Fantastic, Black Bolt, Namor the Submariner, and the Black Panther. And they have formed this kind of secret cabal to influence world events through their actions. Now, we don't have a lot of intel on the actual adventures they've been on. In one of them, they tried to end the Skrull invasion, but they actually kind of made things worse. They sought to contain the Infinity Gems, and they like really fucked with the Beyonder for a while, trying to contain him. Professor X died at the hands of Cyclops with the Phoenix Force before the major Illuminati story blew up after that. And then Beast became a big part of the story. And the Illuminati went on to destroy a whole bunch of planets in the multiverse. So they got much more corrupt later. But
they got more corrupt after Beast was involved. Surprising.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about Beast another time. But these early actions, this idea of I'm going to be part of this secret group of mostly white American men and influence world events. Justin, are you willing to take the pro side on this one?
Sure. Yeah. So this is actually one that all right. The first point was Xavier acting on his own accord in his best interests. He's at least sourcing it out to a group and everyone's adding in input. So it's a step in the better direction and they have some well intentions. Sure, it does blow up in their face a few times, but you don't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs, right? I feel like this is you're bringing together a council versus acting in your own personalized, because he could have been, in our first point of this conversation, he could have been just doing what he needed to be doing for the best interests of mutants. Sometimes he did, but to align with an entire council of people that weren't mutants otherwise, but were representative of other super teams that sought the best interests of our Earth, I think this is a fairly, intentioned point.
Okay. And Regina, are you willing to take the anti-side?
Sure. I have severe problems with the Illuminati because although it seems altruistic and yes, they are battling really severe threats, you're going to tell me you couldn't find any really fucking amazing women to give you a counterpoint, because our minds do work a little bit differently than men's. We're going to find solutions and alternatives that you might not even consider. And there are a lot of badass women in the Marvel universe that should be considered part of this council to kind of mitigate what they typically do. And I mean, and I'm just going to give a real life example. If you look at architecture, if you look at how a male architect draws and designs something versus a female architect, the designs are completely different. And I think that when you're facing a world-ending threat, we need something else besides just a bunch of dicks in a room.
There is that, I think it's just like a variant cover or something, but it is like the female version of the Illuminati. It's all of their female counterparts. And it would objectively be a much more cohesive and useful team of people.
I think in the case of elected or appointed officials, there is usually a checks and balances system in place to keep power in check, right? We have an advisory council, we have people reviewing and censuring, except when you get in cases where people will do huge things where they're like, keep it secret, bury it, right? And I think with a room like this, there's no checks and balances except themselves. So that's where it starts to fall into moral corruption for me, is nobody appointed these guys. They're like, let's just do it ourselves. But we have mostly heroes on the team. You're not seeing Dr. Doom and Loki sitting with them, right? It's heroes who ideally went out in the end, but Mr. Fantastic and Iron Man, among the others, are huge assholes themselves. So there's some big problems with all this. So, Derrick, go ahead.
I'm against this because, first of all, you're working with Stark and Richards. Personally, I think Stark's been benefiting off of mutant oppression for years. I'm not saying he built the Sentinels, but he had input. Just saying. No.
Also, in the words of someone who's never done anything wrong, where were you when our babies were dying?
Thank you. And also the thing about it is, I understand why they were appointed. I mean, Xavier's leader of the X-Men, Mr. Fantastic's leader of the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, he's the front man for the Avengers, or the country club.
The bill.
Yeah, right. And Namor, because Namor will get mad if you don't invite him. He's like,
Namor,
I heard you guys were doing something. How come you didn't call me?
Namor literally rules 75% of the planet. So
right.
Oh, okay. It's one planet. Okay.
Our meetings are on land, Namor. Get out of here.
It's like, get out of here.
Okay, are we ready to vote on this one? You guys feel okay?
I have a question. Where does sending Hulk into space fall into? Was Xavier on the team then? Because that was bad.
No, that was no. Yeah, he was, but he wasn't. Wait, no, he wasn't.
I don't think so, but I'm not positive. I didn't reread that prior to this.
Yeah.
Wikipedia.
But yeah, the Illuminati launched Hulk into space. I think it was specifically Doctor Strange, Mr. Fantastic, Iron Man who did that, I believe.
And Namor was the one who said, if he comes back, and he will kick all of your asses and he'll be right.
Which he did. So let's assume he did not launch Hulk into space, but I might be wrong.
Okay.
So based on the rest of this, let's go ahead and vote again, 1 through 5, 5 being pretty evil. Regina.
I'm gonna give it a 4. It's come on, you know better. You've you know what diversity is and how people think, and you should have been the first person to say, we need some other people in this room.
Justin?
Yeah, no, honestly, Regina, I am wholeheartedly agreeing that the council should have been more representative of the earth, but I think the creation of the council is still morally concerning, but not inappropriate anyway. I feel like it could have gotten better in a second iteration, and first run was not the best. So I'm gonna go 2.
Okay, Derrick?
I'm gonna go with 4. Like, I understand that this was a brain trust and they were all working together, but still, you went out, you picked a fight with the Skrulls after and initiated the Kree Skrull war. Come on, get the fuck out of here with that. Like,
Noelle?
I go 3. I don't think, I like that he's working with other people and not just unilaterally making decisions for once, but not the best still.
Patrick?
This is a 5 for me. I mean, huge inclusion issues that we've already discussed aside. I mean, these guys should not be directing the fate of the entire world in secret, and especially as things go further along, they're just unilaterally destroying other worlds en masse. It's not good. It's not good.
But they're doing it now.
It is the prototype for the council. Like, it's hard to overlook that.
At least that's out in the open to some degree, though.
Is it though? Who really knows?
Well, like the Quiet Council, okay, no, but at least the world understands that Krakoa basically now rules everything.
But
like,
the
whole
Quiet
world knows
Council is
about
a very
Arakko.
well, and specifically also the Quiet Council is also, it's the same. He didn't learn anything from this.
No.
He's still,
We're going to come back to the Quiet Council, but on the Illuminati specifically, Brad, what's your vote?
I'm gonna say because he didn't learn anything from this later, 4.
And I am a 3 on that one. I think it can be argued in multiple ways, but again, pretty over the line. Okay, so this next category is perhaps the one that may elicit the strongest feelings. We had a storyline a few years back that rewrote the ethos of the X-Men in a lot of ways. So Professor X has his 5 original students. Havoc and Polaris kind of join up. He sends the team to investigate an island called Krakoa. They end up getting trapped and are dying as the island feeds off of their energy. Xavier's super worried about his team, and so he goes to Moira, his ally and former love, who is training her own team of young mutants on Muir Island. So we have Sway and Darwin and Petra and Kid Vulcan, who we later will learn is Cyclops and Havoc's brother. Xavier recruits these students, gives them months worth of training telepathically in a couple of hours, sends them to Krakoa, and they all seemingly die. I learned as a handbook writer, I used to work on Marvel handbooks, you always use the word seemingly before you say the word die, because in comics, everybody comes back. But they all seemingly die, and Professor X just buries it. The seeming murder of 4 young kids. He lies to Cyclops, he lies to his students, he lies to Moira. Then we move into Giant Size X-Men #1, where he recruits Storm and Thunderbird and Colossus and the others, and sends them to Krakoa, and things go differently the second time around. So we have him using his powers in a very strange way, but making a huge mistake, resulting in deaths that impact people he loves, and then completely burying the truth afterward. Derrick, let's hear the pro side from you.
Oh, okay. Pro. If it wasn't for this, we wouldn't have the second generation of X-Men. So this had to happen. Also, like, I understand it's really bad. It's bad. It's probably going to get a 4 for me. But last time he put a bunch of 16-year-old kids against Magneto, like, they had against Magneto. So it's kind of like
I've come to understand that babies can fight huge things. How was that? No.
Child soldiers is the next category, but Deadly Genesis itself. Derrick, anything else on the pro side?
I think Charles was wrong on this one, but I think Moira deserves just as much blame, because she, like, with everything we know about her now, how much was really Charles, how much was her? It was a group decision. I don't blame it all on Charles, but it sucks, but we wouldn't have Nightcrawler if it wasn't it. We would have Darwin instead of Nightcrawler. Do you want to live in that world? I don't.
So sacrificing these children got us this other cool team.
We can make more.
Those
They made
kids
more.
suck. I don't like those kids. Kill them.
One pro argument that I would make, if you think of Xavier as a military general, we have people in combat who have to send in soldiers and they lose those soldiers at times. I think there's a certain amount of possible forgiveness there, but where it gets very complicated is then in the burial of that truth afterward. So Patrick, are you willing to offer the anti-side there?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's fucked to just cover this up. I mean, it's essentially a PR sort of thing, like, look at my nice new team. Let's forget about the
dead kids,
the lives I spent to get here. Yeah, the dead kids that I killed to get here.
They're the kids buried in the cellar.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's very disturbing. And I mean,
hey, they're on Krakoa. Only 2 of them died. Only 2.
And yeah, they seem fine now, don't they?
Hey,
They're doing
drinking away
great.
their days.
hey. How you? Hey, you died. I won't judge you. No judgment.
Anyone who has strong feelings or points they want to bring up about Deadly Genesis? Noelle, go ahead.
Yeah, so on the general thing, generals we think highly of, we understand that they're making decisions with people's lives. However, generals who use child soldiers are generally frowned upon, I think, around the world. And so, he's sending children to go do these things, and it seems like he didn't want to admit that he fucked up, so he sends another group of children after them. And it just makes me wonder, what's his goal for these X-Men in the first place? Is he trying to help them, or is he just using them? Like what good is he doing them if he's sending them on missions where they're going to get killed?
Which is our next point. Justin, go ahead.
I feel like he was just trying to save face too. I feel like, to your point about children's soldiers and a general that thinks tactically, he was thinking very emotionally. He was thinking, my students, my children, let me coerce Moira. She's got some kids. Hey, let me borrow your kids and I'll send them to, this team of 5 to 7 adults that have trained together for years couldn't defeat this island. 7 of them. Let's send these 4 that I'll brain train for a couple of weeks. And then playing off their emotions of their desires to wanting to be an X-Man. Like that was huge from that book of, Vulcan, does this mean we're going to be X-Men? Yes, sir. Yes, it is. Like, throw you into the fire. And Moira was against it. Moira was deadly against it. She didn't want, that's not what they're there for. That's not what we are training them for. And I would definitely call into question the coercion factor on Xavier's part of not only, and this isn't even approaching the fact that then to wipe everyone's mind just to save face for himself and to make it so that his star pupil didn't hate him for killing his kid brother, like that. I'm out on Xavier on this one. So this is 5 all day.
No, Justin,
we also have some really frightening use of his powers here too, which we didn't mention before, but if you can download entire languages and like weeks of training into someone's brain in a few seconds, that's scary. I don't know. Let's vote. Justin, go ahead.
5.
Whoa.
Oh, did someone have another point?
Oh, yeah. Justin, you're right. Like you're right. He made an emotional reaction. Like he was worried about his kids. And also we forgot Beast wasn't there. Beast wasn't on Krakoa. Because he was with the Avengers.
Oh, yeah.
You're good. You're right.
And also we forgot Sage.
So 6.
I'm
Everybody forgets Sage. I'm sorry. No, but Xavier. But yeah, he made an emotional decision. Like he didn't. I think he was still guilty about it. Yeah, he was trying to save face, but he's super guilty. He felt. I feel like he was. Like, yeah, he kept it to himself, but he was guilty. Like he
has a lot of keeping a lot of guilt inside him. I don't know if that makes it morally better.
Yeah, he's wrong.
I will say, so I'm very much here for Team Moira as morally complicated and problematic. But so I don't know, her involvement, whatever. I will also say, I know this is an X book, so we're committed to like having mutants be the ones that we send on the front of the firing line. But this is a world that very much is inhabited by adult superheroes who could have probably handled that mission a little better and had actual experience for years, that he could have sent in to rescue his kids. He could have gone to the Fantastic Four. He could have gone to any of these teams and said, hey, I have some kids who I love that I blew it and now they're trapped and gonna die. Will you go save them? And probably they wouldn't have died because they have their own book.
Doctor Strange, one call, that's all.
Yeah, exactly. There were other answers than baby militias.
On Deadly Genesis, Brad, what's your vote?
Oh, 5. Baby militias are canceled.
Derrick, what's your vote?
I'm going with 5.
Regina?
Like that was over the line. He shouldn't have done that. But we wouldn't have the second class of X-Men. We wouldn't have Storm. We would have Sway, and we're like, who are you?
Okay. Well, I'm gonna say I grew up in an area that was very rough. There was a lot of guns, there was a lot of violence, and these were 12 to 17-year-old kids. There weren't necessarily adults directing us, but at the same time, we could handle it. So I'm going to give him a 2. He was trying to save his other kids. I don't have no guarantee that Tony Stark is going to go after these mutant kids. I got to do something to rescue my firstborns.
Okay. Noelle?
5.
Patrick?
I'll give it a 4. I mean, it's fucked, but I have been swayed to the viewpoint that this was an emotional decision for him, and he was trying to save the team that he felt strongly about.
If it ended there, it'd be a 3 for me, but he covered it up, so it's a 5.
Yes.
Okay, so next point, we're gonna jump down a little bit, is the creation of an army of teenagers under the guise of a school. So we have the selection of a number, at this point it's hundreds, frankly, of students from around the world who, when their powers develop, they're likely to be hurt by others or to hurt others. And it's a huge trauma when your powers develop. So he's bringing these teens and these students in with the idea of educating them in a safe space, which inadvertently makes them targets sometimes, because how many times has this goddamn school been destroyed at this point, right? But we have him altering the memories of some of their loved ones to take away the knowledge that they have mutant members of their family at times. We have him training children, ages 13 in the case of Kitty Pryde, 16 in the case of Iceman at the beginning, all the way up, and sending them into space to fight monsters and aliens and demons and evil mutants and into other countries and underwater and onto telepathic realms. So there's this weaponization of students with their powers, who he's using ideally for the greater good. Now, one of the things I'm tying into this category is something called the Xavier Protocols. It's kind of an obscure story. But we learned that Xavier has designed protocols to take out each of his students.
The How to Kill Your Babies manual.
If they ever get out of hand, including himself. And at a certain point, this information becomes weaponized against the X-Men because it's acquired. So we're focused primarily on the students themselves. And I think a lot of Xavier's lies fall into here as well. He's asking his students for complete loyalty and trust and regard, and frankly, even adoration, while regularly telling them stories, withholding truths, not giving them the full scope of what they're getting into mission-wise. We have regular lies that's just dozens and dozens of those over time with him not using full disclosure. So let's hear, first of all, if he didn't do this, we wouldn't have the X-Men. So I'm all for it in that capacity because it's amazing storytelling. But for the purpose of this conversation, Justin, are you willing to argue the pro side of this?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm very much pro the I don't want to call it a facade, but the idea, the intention of recruiting these children to better understand and utilize their gifts for the common good of humanity. Sure, things happen that we need to solve and get out there and fix, but I feel like these are students that would otherwise be shunned and discriminated against and would not be understood. So let's bring them to Xavier's school. Let's train them in the proper use of their powers. Let's give them peers that they can collaborate with and work together with. And on the Xavier protocols, that's just a good failsafe. That's just someone preparing for the worst case scenario. I can't fault him on that. That's Batman all day. That's
Not a great.
Yeah, and that worked out so well for Batman.
I mean, sure, you double passcode lock it, and you do a little bit more security on it so it doesn't get stolen and used against you. But you need to work out those scenarios, because how many times, this is a man that could control people. So you have to worry about if your students could be controlled, if you could be controlled. I think about the new X-Men, the fact that he pulls out a gun on himself when he feels someone in his mind. That's him willing to do what's necessary to prevent his mind from being taken over. And I feel like I'm pro that.
Okay. Noelle, are you willing to give the counter argument here?
Yes. So I get it. These kids all need a place to go. They need training. They need help with their powers. But why does that immediately lead into using them as your own little personal army? It doesn't make sense. They have all these amazing powers that, if your goal is mutants and humans coexisting, these powers could be really useful in building bridges with humanity. Have them go help people somehow, not just go fight, because there are other superheroes in the world who are very good at fighting. So why do the children have to go and fight rather than help their powers figure out how they can be used? And I think that really, at the end of the day, Charles Xavier is afraid of mutants. His first run in with the Shadow King, and then he's all about stopping evil mutants. And I think that runs into the protocols, which is he's afraid of mutants. I think he would prefer that there weren't mutants if he could be the only one or something. So yeah, I don't think it's great in the end what he's doing.
Thoughts? Anyone who'd like to share? Patrick, go ahead, and then Derrick.
Yeah, so I obviously, sure, it is morally questionable to have a group of kids, teenagers who you send out to do these things. However, he is a smart guy who has trained them well, and what would they be getting up to without his guidance? They probably might be putting their powers to lesser use or getting into more trouble along the way. And while he is sort of authoritarian, it's not like they have no choice in the matter. There are lots of cases of students quitting, leaving, questioning him. So there's plenty of, push-pull in his relationship with the students, where I actually find this one of his less questionable choices.
I think Xavier as a father is a different category than Xavier as a military general. We're not talking about Legion here, but as a father figure to his students, I think there's a lot of endearing moments where he's helping provide a safety for these kids, right? Even though he's lying to their parents, which is strange in its own way. But Xavier as a military general falls into kind of a different space. Derrick, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, with Noelle, she said making these kids into your soldiers. I say they were a response team. They were a highly trained response team, and they the danger room. They know how to use their powers to a comfortable level. And also, we look at how the original 5 X-Men, where they have been if Xavier hadn't found them. Jean would have gone insane, because when she was 6, she saw her friend died, got hit by a car. Yeah, we know the story. She felt it. And because of that one instance, not only did Xavier find her, it put her on the Phoenix's radar.
I mean, we've had the story too, Derrick, of if Xavier had died, we would get the Age of Apocalypse as a result.
Right. Thank you. I mean, Cyclops would have been caught by Sinister, and come on. I think we all agree that Sinister is the worst case scenario for Cyclops. And yeah. Iceman would have been in jail or been put in the Weapon X program because
or just been an accountant.
No, he wouldn't, because he was in jail because he was on a date with on a date and he was being harassed and he flash froze or flash fried. Yeah, Xavier found him in jail, and if somebody else would have gotten there first, Derrick, Shaw, Magneto, Orcus. Come on, he was the best case scenario. And also the New Mutants, their original intention, they were not supposed to be superheroes. They went out and did it themselves. They
insisted on being superheroes.
Yeah. So you can have the kids, you can tell them not to do something, as Charles and Magneto tried many times. Tell them no, they're going to do it anyway. So you might as well just train them, be okay with it. Just give them all the resources you can to make sure they make a good decision.
So in my podcast, we've done the X-Men comics one at a time. And at the end of X-Men 4, Xavier is supposedly injured saving the rest of the team, and he loses his powers. X-Men number 5, the original run, the teens then take care of Xavier for several panels. They're carrying him around and feeding him, and he's like, "Are you okay?" Then they rush into space to fight Magneto on Asteroid M, and they all almost die. And when they return to the mansion, Xavier goes, "Just kidding, I had my powers the whole time." So you guys all passed the test. And my co-host of the podcast, Heather, this is when she's like, "Oh my God, I fucking hate this guy." She got very strong feelings at that point because it's a really fucked up story. But I think that kind of summarizes it, right? When it plays to his advantage, he wants a particular type of relationship with his students, but he also wants to be adored and revered and quickly forgiven. Then we have stories like the bus full of students getting bombed right outside the mansion and all of them, dying. So it hits on a number of levels. Anybody who has really strong feelings for or against here?
Sure. Throw the children in your danger room made out of a slave. What could go wrong?
Oh man! Look at. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Regina.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say, I think that Noelle and her description of Xavier actually on the inside maybe hating mutants. That's something that I hadn't really considered before, but it would totally make sense. But at the same time, do you really want human superheroes going after these mutant menaces that are ready to harm the rest of humanity and even other mutants, as we see, with Apocalypse going after and murdering mutants throughout time? Who better to go against other mutants than people who are mutants, people who know this is my future and I'm willing to fight for it? Does he go about it in a very problematic way? Hell yes. That whole thing with the carrying me around and feeding me, and oh my God, Jesus Christ. But overall, long term, he did turn it into something that, even now we see the repercussions of people who are still hated and feared, right? I don't remember if it was right after Age of Apocalypse or what happened there. I think it was right before Onslaught, but there was a book, I think it was called X-Men Prime with Dennis Hogan, and he's desperately trying to get to the mansion and these humans are chasing him and he is literally murdered right outside of the gates. And so many mutants needed somebody, and for better or worse, who else was there for them? Not really that many people. So long-term overall, again, very problematic, but at the same time, something great happened as a result.
However, on the flip side, how many kids could he have saved with his billions that he did not?
That's true. He wanted to keep it a secret because he knew that, if people knew where they lived, they bombed them. They bombed the house.
Which they
did.
Which they did.
Also, sorry.
That's okay. Also, I just want to point out, even though he's a very powerful man, he knows he can't do it by himself. He does have the mutant underground. He does have all these other things going on in the background that we don't necessarily see on panel very frequently, where he is conducting outreach that we don't even know about, trying to rescue mutants who are in really shitty situations. So I'm gonna give him a little pass on this one.
So let's vote. Regina, you go first.
I'm gonna give it a 1.
Okay, Patrick.
I'm going to give it a 1 too. I mean, obviously there are a lot of moral questions that we could bring up, but overall, I think this is a case where the ends do justify the means.
Okay, Derrick.
I'm going to give it a 1 too, because Charles at one point in New Mutants told Cypher, like, are you sure you want to go here? Because like your powers are really passive. You can just be cool. And also Cypher never told his parents that he was a mutant.
Okay,
so
Justin.
So 1.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 1. If we're talking the original 5, maybe I'd go 2, but especially along the full continuum, what I was thinking as we were talking, the giant size team are all adults, right? The new mutants are now the students that he's saying, hey, yeah, I know you get the super suit and there's these superheroes all over the walls, but you're not superheroes. So at least he's growing in his approach to training children soldiers. Yeah. So 1.
Noelle.
I'm gonna go 3. I think maybe having someone else join him and bounce some ideas off of what to do with these kids would have been useful. So on his own, I think I'll give him a 3.
Okay, and Brad?
I'm gonna go with a 2. I mostly because of the argument of who better to pursue mutant threats than other mutants, which is later, one of the core tenets of Krakoa and the immunity and all that stuff, allowing mutants to assess mutant threats. Sometimes you can only trust your own people. It's unfortunate that there were no, adult mutant teams to equal the likes of the Avengers at the time, but I do agree with that. When most other superheroes tend to be neutral in regards to the oppression of mutants, somehow you have no option.
I am going to surprise you all and give him a 1 on this for one simple fact. Those visions from Moira that allowed him to see all of the threats that were coming in the future, he knew these kids had to be ready, and he knew which kids, and I'm going to give him credit for that. But we have things like Deadly Genesis that fall in here too.
Yeah.
So because I love the X-Men so much, and I'm really grateful he started the team, assuming he were a real person like we're talking about today, I will give him a 1, right? Okay, so the next space we're going to go really quickly, and this should be a shorter discussion, I think. Professor X as a father. So far as we know, he actually has 2 children. He has David Haller, who is his son, who he presumably did not know about until David was a teenager, an older teenager. We're going to assume he did not read anyone's mind and find out that he had a secret kid, and it was real convenient to avoid paying child support by pretending there was no kid out there. But assuming he did not actually know, in New Mutants 24 through 26, we have him learning about David, who has insane levels of power and is an insane threat and is insane. David falls into kind of a coma, and Professor X is like, well, basically there's nothing I can do. And he just kind of leaves him there. And this happens a few times, and it's played up in the X-Men Legacy series by Cy Spurrier, All About Legion, and even more recently, where it's almost just kind of a comedic point as part of the series, how shitty of a father Professor X is to David. But what are your thoughts on Professor X as a father figure? This is a completely different category, obviously. Brad, are you willing to do the pro side here?
Yeah, but I do have a question. I feel like it's fairly like textual that like Cyclops and Jean to a large extent see him as a father as well, especially Cyclops. Mm-hmm. Are we counting this in that, or is it literally just genetic fatherhood?
Biological.
I think for the purpose of just this point, we're talking biological. I think in the last point we kind of did the father figure lumped in there.
Okay.
Oh, and then the second point, my apologies. He also apparently has a child with Mystique, Charles Xavier II, who came back from the future at a certain point, but he secretly married Mystique and had a baby that he may or may not know about. But we're just focusing on David primarily. Anyway, go ahead, Brad.
So I mean, the ethics on like Charles's lack of involvement with David until, of course, he's contacted by Moira years later to deal with him. It's literally, she did not want him to know. He violated Gabrielle once with good intentions. He violated pretty much every part of her brain before. She says herself, I needed this one thing to be just mine. I needed him not involved in this. I needed this as far away from Charles Xavier as possible. I wouldn't say he and it's even pointed out a few times. I think he seems to sense that. Like, I think he knows and is trying to actively stay away because Gabrielle wants it that way. Because even at some point, Danny goes like, hey, he looks a lot like you. He looks like you. He's got your ugly face. And he's like, no, I don't see it. And she's like, no, I do. And he's like, anyway, bye. But the ethics on staying out of his life, the mother did not want him there. Gabrielle wanted him far away, and so he stayed away.
So I'm going to take the anti one here. I believe, I don't know all of you personally. Regina and I are the only two parents in the room. Do I have that right? Do any of the rest of you have children?
Nephews.
That you know of?
Yeah, right. No. I'm better at Charles than that.
Speaking as a father who also has a shitty father, I'm a really good dad. And being a parent requires reorienting, reprioritizing, like being there for your kids. It's got to be like a permanent piece of you. So I have a thing that like gets me in a personal space about like just bad dads out there. But rereading the stories, my feelings were not as strong as they were before I had reread the stories. I think I got caught up on this idea of like, oh, he's such an asshole. But when I reread, I'm like, okay, there's probably room for him to have a little bit of an out up to a point. This is a man who will set everything aside to help certain people, but it also feels like he's never done that for David. Legion's always kind of been the outlier. So it's almost like he sees him as a necessary casualty, like an inconvenience. And that bothers me in their relationship. But if he truly didn't know about David for most of his life, I can kind of get it at a certain point. Regina, do you want to add anything to that as a parent?
You know, I have a lot of experience, unfortunately, with parents that don't connect with their children. You know, I was a foster parent. My aunt was a foster mother who's the mother of her foster children kept saying, I'm going to let you adopt them, and then not letting her do it. Like, it was like this whole big back and forth thing. Just, you know, so there are parents who use their children inappropriately. There are parents who are detached from their children. There are parents who, you know, parenthood and having a relationship with your parents is very fraught for some reason. And I don't think I knew that when I was coming up. I had a stepfather who loved me very much. He adopted me when I was 8 years old. He'd been my father since I was 3. You know, my mom was always there for me. She would stay up with me all night and help me study for like the spelling test. I wanted to be like the best speller in the school, you know, so she was there for me for that. So I didn't realize until I was much older that sometimes you just don't have a good relationship or any relationship at all with your parents. Charles has this son that he does love David on some level. He does love David, but he doesn't know how to relate to him. And part of that is that Gabrielle was like, no, this is the one thing that's mine. I'm keeping him from you. And I don't want you to have anything to do with him because I know what's best for my son. So there's going to be a distance there. He didn't grow up, you know, watching David play t-ball, right? You know, there's things that you do with your children as they're growing up that he never experiences. And he doesn't know how to relate to David. And David has this incredible power that Xavier actually really can't compete with it. Like, he doesn't have a way to bridge whatever this thing is between them. So I feel bad for both of them. I don't think it was anyone's fault. I mean, it was more Xavier's fault than anybody for being a jackass. But I have a lot of empathy for both of them. I don't think he's like the worst father ever, but Jesus Christ, Charles, wrap that pickle up.
Pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Derrick, you are ready. I can see it.
Okay. I blame Gabrielle for all of it. Legion should talk to his mom. Charles had nothing to do with it. She, like Bradley said, she took away his choice, and then she married some other guy and let the guy think that was his kid. Just say that's a little bad. And plus, when Legion's powers started going out of control, I can understand Charles being a little pissed, because this is the second time Moira called him saying, "Hey, a mutant needs your help," but he's always told a half truth by Moira and because Moira and Gabrielle, because Gabrielle told Moira, "Don't tell Charles." Moira knew. She could have said something, but she didn't care. And because Moira thinks that Charles is some sort of autistic kid, she thinks that she is his only friend. So, and with Legion right now with Cy Spurrier, I don't think Cy Spurrier really knows what he's talking about. Like every time I read Way of X, I'm like, did you read that? Did you read what happened? Legion is like, really? I totally understand what Charles is going through, like how he's feeling, because now he has to be a father to this kid who hates him, and like, why? Peace, I'm out.
I do think though that he can train soldiers. Like, here's months of training in 5 seconds. I certainly think he could have done more to help David. Justin, go ahead. Or I'm sorry, Patrick.
You can't beat daddy issues.
Yeah, I was going to kind of agree with what you just said, Chad. I mean, it just feels neglectful to me. I mean, especially because in the New Mutants arc, which is awesome. I mean, Charles conducts some pretty effective like psychic therapy on David in that time. And then, even just if you look at Charles from a purely opportunistic viewpoint, it's shocking that he didn't go, "Oh, I could do something with this kid. Let's actually take care of my son and see if we can do some more with him and get him on the X-Men." It's clear. I mean, like in Way of X, David resents him, and understandably so from my point of view.
The therapist part of me speaking, I see droves of people who have biological children, and because their relationship falls apart, they just like forget about those kids, and then they start a new family, and they're like the most amazing parents to the younger kids. You guys know what I'm talking about? I feel like that's happening. Like, Rogue, you are my chosen child. Storm, I love you, but David, get away. Like, I don't want to be reminded of past relationships.
Same thing though.
So let's vote on Xavier as a father. Patrick. 1 through 5.
Yeah, I'm just reviewing the numbers again. I'll say 3. I feel for David.
Noelle?
I say 3 because I think the fact that Charles didn't know David is his own fault, and that he was basically Gabrielle's psychologist and shouldn't have had a relationship with her in the first place. So I don't know. I'm close to a 4, but I'm going to say 3.
Brad?
She makes a great point about him being her psychologist. Oh, because I was going to say 2, because she literally didn't want him around. That'll adjust it to 3. He listened to what Gabrielle wanted, but they should have never done that.
Derrick?
You know what? I'm going to be in the majority. I say he did nothing wrong. I gave it a 1 because Gabrielle, like, he's like, "Oh, this is mine." Like, really? Like, he gave you your space, and then you call him. Like, if you didn't want a David in his life, you wouldn't have called him at all. The only reason why you need him, why you need him, is because. No, I'm sorry. You only call Charles when you need something. That's not. Yeah. So, fuck her.
Justin?
Sorry.
I think it's a 3. I think that there was not any real effort in trying after the points that we're talking, with New Mutants at that point in the run, and then in X Factor, there was so much more time where he could have put the time into, kind of going off of what Patrick said. This is an opportunity not only to help your biological son that you have had an estranged relationship with, but to also make a real impact in a mutant's life who can't control his powers. And I feel like that just strikes too many things that should have resonated with Charles Xavier. It felt out of character, and it felt like he missed an opportunity.
Regina?
No, somebody mentioned, well, he could have brought David into the X-Men and used him, but then we would be judging a completely different thing, wouldn't we? So, and I don't know. I think bringing your child into the X-Men might actually be more harmful, because there's so many different dynamics that you're already juggling, and to bring in your child into this group that you've formed, I don't know. I don't think that would have worked, but I'm going to give Charles a little bit of leniency here. I have great sympathy for Gabrielle. I think that she did the best she could with a terrible situation. It was a situation that Charles created, but for the actual life of the child, I'm going to give him a 2. I think he could have done more. I think he could be doing more, but for whatever reason, he's not. Is he respecting David's resentment? I don't know. There's still time to make a difference, Charles, but Jesus Christ.
It's a 3 for me as well. And to just
how it's a bad situation. I don't understand how it's a bad situation. Like, he wasn't told. Like, it wasn't like
he wasn't told, because he took advantage of her. He took advantage of her.
I don't think so. Because remember, like
it is even he thinks, like, he says so and she says so. Everyone involved thinks he took advantage of her.
Yeah, she was in a psychiatric hospital, like catatonic, and then he goes from helping her to having a relationship
himself.
with her.
But it wasn't like they dated like exactly after that. Remember, they said they were hanging out for weeks.
So I'm going to give him.
That's way too soon to start a relationship with someone who just your patients. Like, there's a
gap. I understand that. It's just like it wasn't just those two. Magneto was there too. So like, if Magneto felt something, like, he could have like, yo, bro, calm down. Like, you might do that.
I'm going to give him a 3. To Justin's point, even though he did the best he knew at the time, there was a whole point where he thought, I'm going to go live with my girlfriend in space instead of staying on Earth to help my child. There's a lot of time that he could have focused on David. So it's a 3 for me. We're going to pause the recording for just a couple of minutes to give people a bathroom break, refill on liquids. We have 2 points left. So everybody just come back. I'm going to pause. We'll still be on screen. I'm just not recording for a minute.
Okay.
Okay, so for the next point, we're going to talk about Xavier's dark side. Xavier has this bizarre manifestation of the evil parts of him that take their own form. It almost makes me wonder if it's some sort of secondary mutation that we haven't been told about. There's a weird old, Cassandra Nova's kind of part of that. There's a weird old series that a lot of people have not read called X-Men versus Micronauts. It's kind of obscure. But Xavier's evil side manifests as someone called the Entity, I believe he's called, and he's manipulating events and fighting all the heroes, and it gets tracked back to Xavier, who like reabsorbs his evil side, right? We also have Xavier going through a tremendous amount of heavy trauma. Once he mind wipes Magneto, his evil side joins with Magneto's evil side and becomes this insanely powerful creature called Onslaught. How culpable is Xavier for all of that, if at all? If so, Onslaught has gone on to kill many, many, many civilians. He's altered the lives of a lot of heroes by shunting them into a site. Well, I guess that was Franklin Richards. Tried to kill a bunch of heroes who got sent into a different universe for a while. A lot of really dangerous things have taken place. Onslaught's currently in the books, featured in Way of X. So Justin, are you willing to take the pro argument on this one?
Sure. So pro as in, Onslaught's not so bad.
As in Xavier's not so bad, however you want to phrase it.
Sure. Yeah. Because Onslaught himself is terrible, but I can't wholly blame Xavier for Onslaught, right? Everyone has a dark side, everyone has dark emotions, everyone deals with trauma in their own way and has that built up over time. And there are things that are within him, within his subconscious, within his mind, and especially as we've been talking about the things that have happened to him throughout his life and manifesting in different ways. His negative emotions, I will potentially say, how it occurred, I will say is maybe a hit onto Xavier. The shutting down Magneto's mind that led to that. But I think, the fact that he has these emotions, these dark feelings, this part of himself, and especially being the powerful mutant that he is, it's probably multiplied. It's in various ways. So I think them being pushed further with his inherent powers, it's something beyond his control, and it's something that he takes responsibility for after the fact, but it's something that beforehand he was unaware of.
Okay. Noelle, are you willing to take the Xavier's a jerk argument on this one?
Sure, always.
He's ready.
So, Charles Xavier recognizes the danger of other mutants and their powers and their ability. And it seems like he maybe should have taken into consideration the danger and harm that he could cause on his own. And he's obviously aware of this dark side that he has, and he has some psychology training. So maybe he should have taken some steps to work on that before it got out of control, because he had plenty of time to do so. So I think, what happened, I don't think it's necessarily his fault what happened. The part with the Magneto, yeah, that was a choice. But I don't think he could have known what it would spiral into. But I think he could have taken steps beforehand to avoid how dark it got.
I think that's a fair argument. Counterpoints. Who has opinions about this? Derrick, go ahead, and then Brad.
Okay. I think what happened with Onslaught, it went back further than what happened with Magneto. It started, I think, with Ileana's death, because when that little girl caught the legacy virus back in Uncanny X-Men 303, Xavier was trying his hardest to save her.
It started when he murdered his twin in the womb.
Well, fair.
It is the compilation. It is the apex of all of the trauma in his life up until then. Yeah.
Right. And so and in the more, and he was so distraught. Look at this. This is like a panel from Uncanny X-Men 304 when they buried Ileana. He was he's so guilty. I couldn't save this child. I have all this power and I couldn't save this child. And so that just kind of built on. And then when he got with Magneto, mixed with Magneto, yeah, that got him even more, that guilt turned to rage. And then later on, Regina, you brought this up, Dennis Hogan, he was murdered right outside their gates. And if you go back in with Onslaught, Xavier's always was thinking about that. And right before he turned to Onslaught, he was watching the news, and some human was saying I did it. I will do it. I got a bunch of us would do it. We'll do it again. Lock them all up. And I'm not saying he had a mental breakdown. It's understandable. He should have put a neural inhibitor around it, do something. If he's having on the verge of a nervous breakdown, turn off your powers. You learn from Jean.
Yeah. Brad, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, so if he were any other mutant, or say not one of the world's foremost telepaths, everyone has these dark feelings, and sometimes they exhibit themselves in really unhealthy ways, and sometimes you let it out and I wasn't good or whatever. But he is one of the world's foremost telepaths who has had at that point a lot of experience with the astral plane and all that stuff. He's used to the things that are his thoughts becoming real things in the world, becoming physical, for lack of a better term. He should have, I would say he should have known a little better than to just be oh, I'm just gonna expel all these bad thoughts, that inciting incident in Onslaught. He should have known better. I don't blame him for having the negative feelings. It was a compilation of all of his trauma up until that point. But I do blame him for not thinking twice before he, just sort of let him loose out in the world to do whatever they will.
So I'll lean into my clinical social worker background for just a minute. Trauma as it exists in people, which it exists in a lot of us, or all of us to some capacity. We develop coping skills to develop to cope with that trauma as we age. So some people like learn how to numb it. Some people learn how to never be vulnerable. Some people like learn how to take care of everybody else instead of themselves. Some people just only focus on their good aspects, like, look how amazing I am. And then they just like willfully divide the parts they're not proud of away. So Professor X, that seems to be the case, that last one, where he just lauds his really powerful stuff and he buries his shames really deep. All of the plans of like, or all of the things like, I lost this team of students who died, and I had inappropriate thoughts about my teenage student when she was a child in my school. And I have all of this trauma from soldiers that died and my parents dying, and my stepbrother who was a huge bully. I mean, he has trauma that he's pushing. Now, if it's part of your power set, that trauma can then form its own entity, I think you got to learn that and figure it out. And at a particular point, you could be pretty culpable in not handling that well, because again, with great trauma, with great power comes great responsibility. It's an interesting thing to consider because both the entity and onslaught happened independent of him. There's a huge piece of me that wonders in the current books how much he's being impacted by these darker impulses, which we're going to talk about next. But I think there's some things to be revealed about the current Professor X as he is. Any thoughts on that, or any counterpoints?
I mean, like you said, these things are actually, they're part of him that is given form, but it's not something that he necessarily knew would actually happen. Who would ever think my darker impulse? I mean, even if I have telepathic powers and I'm used to things happening on the astral plane, who would ever think this thing is going to take on this badass armor formed and just go on a killing spree? I mean, he had never had that happen until it actually did happen. And I don't blame him for the creation of it. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, people give Bucky a lot of shit for murdering Tony Stark's parents in the MCU, but that wasn't Bucky's choice. Bucky had programming basically that forced him to do that. It's not something that he wanted to do. He was just the hand that did it. And I kind of feel like that's the same or similar thing happening with Onslaught and the entity. It's not Xavier consciously making this choice or even subconsciously. Onslaught himself is a mixture of Magneto and Xavier together. Their anger and their hurt and their passion and their fury and all of this negative energy that has taken its own life. It's like it's his child, basically. You can't blame a parent necessarily for their child becoming a serial killer. There are some cases where the psychology of it, yes, the parent has seriously fucked up, but some children or some people are born sociopaths. Like they are born without what it is that gives them empathy, and they never develop it. And I kind of feel like that's what Onslaught is. He's just a sociopath. He's got this weird psychopathy and he just does not care. He's just ready to wreak havoc without any input from Xavier's actual thought process.
There's an interesting correlation I just barely am thinking of though. It's almost as if Xavier has another like personality that's manifesting itself, right? And he has a son who is schizophrenic, whose power is to manifest personalities. And we have this long thread of Legion under Cy Spurrier, who his catchphrase is like, I rule me. I am responsible for me. I will take care of all of the power sets that I don't have control over because they are mine. And there's an interesting correlation there. So Xavier's, we're looking to exempt him potentially from having this dark side that's done these horrible things, but we have Legion taking responsibility for all of his dark sides. So that's an interesting thought. I don't know.
But does Xavier reject responsibility? I don't think he does when it comes to Onslaught. He does say, I have become a threat. I've become the threat from Bishop's future.
Sure.
I need to do something about it. And he, you know, like Derrick said, he turns himself in and he's like, you know, I need help. And I think that's a huge turning point for his character, because up until then, he was full of hubris and pride and all of these things that make him try to manipulate people and, you know, say, hey, X-Men, feed me. I don't have my power. Right. Carry me around and, you know, treat me like a baby. And I want this adulation. I've had all this trauma and I have something within myself that I need external validation. And I think it's at that point where he realizes I have severely fucked up and I need help.
Justin, what were you going to say?
So there was a couple of things. It was going off of Regina was saying with the mixture of, so we could talk about Xavier's responsibility to kind of self-check himself or even diagnose himself for the potential of what he could do. And there's some problems with that. But also the manifestation of Onslaught is really the mixture of the unknown entity of Magneto's dark thoughts. And how could you even possibly prepare for that happening? Yes, it is Charles Xavier's fault that Magneto's dark thoughts mixed in with his own. Sure, I'm not excusing that. That's probably on that list of terrible, terrible things. But the preparation for it, I think it really goes to the fact that he took responsibility for it after the fact. And I think that is, it puts him at least in some light.
Derrick?
Also, like when Charles Xavier turned himself to the U.S. government, they just locked him up somewhere. They didn't give him any kind of help. He didn't have his powers. Like, so he was further abused by the government that he was trying to adhere to. Is that the right word? Adhere? Yeah. So like, I get it. I understand with Charles. It's just, he tries so hard. But with Legion though, his schizophrenia was a result of a terrorist attack, and he was it? Did he exhort, or did he just like kind of take in all the dying people who were around him?
He has other personalities that he's absorbed, and then the ones generated from within himself.
Right, but he was also in a terrorist attack, right, in a bombing, and that's what kind of like activated his powers.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So like Xavier could have a split personality. I think that would be very interesting. But I think now, like with Hoxpox, Reign of X, whatever you want to call it, he's just not caring anymore. He's like, I don't care how I'm being perceived. I'm just trying to move mutants forward. And remember, he's a henchman. This is Moira's plan.
Xavier. Xavier likely does have a personality disorder, and it's called narcissistic personality disorder.
Yes.
So let's vote on Xavier's dark side. You can give him the benefit of the doubt. You can hold him fully responsible. 1 through 5 in this space. Noelle.
I'm gonna go 2. I don't think he's totally responsible. I think he is responsible for not working on things beforehand, but this time I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Brad?
I'm also gonna go 2, but I will, before we move on, there's a real fascination with Xavier's dark side and writing sort of ways that Xavier can go horribly awry. You see that later on when the Red Skull sort of merges his brain with Xavier's and to catastrophic effects. And also to anyone listening, if you haven't read Extreme X-Men, where a Dazzler-led team goes on a multi-universal trip to destroy 10 evil Xaviers, you should read it. It's fantastic. It's so much fun. As far as 616 Xavier, I'm gonna say 2. I don't necessarily blame. I think he should have thought before he did something. He's not totally unresponsible for Onslaught, but I'm not going to blame him for having trauma and it coming out in an unhealthy way.
Derrick?
I'm going with Noelle. I'm going with 2. He could have done a little bit. He could have done a little bit more. He could have talked to somebody. He has access to a lot of psychiatric professionals. Doc Samson is in his Rolodex. He could talk. He could pick up the phone.
Doc Samson's got a dark side too, though.
Yeah, but his dark side's not going to go and kill everybody.
But if they combine,
it'd be a green mind reader.
Justin.
I think I'm going to go with 2. I don't want to say that he's justified, because I do think that there were things that led him to that point, but there was also some ability to seek out help. I think that actually would have been the best answer, not just being a little self-awareness, but to recognize that and to work with others. And also the whole Wolverine Magneto thing is
Patrick?
It'll be okay.
I've kind of sat back on this one because it's a blind spot for me. I haven't gotten to this in my read through yet, and I just kind of did preliminary wiki
Spoilers.
research on this. Yeah, but I mean, from what I've learned, sounds like about 2 to me. I would be horrified if my dark side was, externalized and manifested as a physical entity, and I had no choice in it. So, yeah, I'll give them mostly a pass on this.
Okay, Regina.
I think I'm going to go with a 2 as well, mostly because as somebody, I resisted receiving mental health almost my entire life until more recently. And it wasn't until I started receiving that help that I realized how much I actually did need. And, it helped me be a better parent to my children. And I mean, I'm not ever going to say I'm a great parent, but you know what? My kids love me and they know I accept them. They come to me when they have problems. I think we have a pretty healthy relationship, but I didn't realize how much of a better parent I could have been to them. And I have a lot of regrets for that. I think Xavier kind of has that same type of personality and thought process where he wants to handle things on his own and do his own thing, and he doesn't need help. And I can struggle through this by myself. And who can I trust to help me get past all of this pain and trauma that I've been experiencing? Nobody's going to understand it. And to an extent, he's right. Nobody can really understand what he's been going through and the burdens that he's carried, maybe that are self-inflicted, but again, as part of something bigger than himself. I don't know that if he had received mental health help, it would have helped what actually happened. I don't blame him for doing what he did to Magneto. It was a terrible thing, but what Magneto was doing was just as terrible. And sometimes you have to do terrible shit to get shit done. So,
Yep.
I think this is the place where I started really feeling terrible for Xavier. Like after everything that he has done that was awful, and then for this to happen, I felt a lot of empathy for him at this point. So I think 2 is fair.
Sometimes you have to do terrible shit to get shit done. So, for example, lying to Mystique and not resurrecting Destiny.
Yeah, what the hell, Xavier?
She had that comment, okay? You hear all the time.
I know, it's a separate story. I'm just
Burn it down.
That's a whole separate
podcast. Little cracks. She stabbed her son, shot her daughter.
I know. We'll do
impersonating her son.
Okay, my vote in this category is a 2 also. We'll keep it across the board. So let's present our final category here. And there's a lot of side stories we could have taken, but I think we summarized nicely. So we have the current House of X, Powers of X era. Patrick, are you reading the current books?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we have a mutant nation has been declared, not for the first time, but in a new and powerful way. We have a strong minority of humans from all over the planet who are gathered together in one space, those who want to be there with a self-appointed government. And there's a lot of really interesting things happening. So number one, they are willingly forgiving horrible criminals all their previous crimes and saying, come here, you get a fresh, clean slate to start from. We will ignore Salim and Mr. Sinister and etc., all of the terrible millions of people that you've potentially killed. And you have a place not only on our island, but in our ruling council of our government. We have Apocalypse and Gorgon and like people who have committed mass murder all over the place. But because they're mutants, all of your crimes are forgiven. Countered by, if you commit one crime or break one of our rules, we're going to toss you in solitary confinement for eternity. And they've only done it to one person so far, which is very problematic in order to teach people a lesson. We have the formation of a mutant CIA. Xavier has put people in charge of keeping mutants protected. And these guys, it's okay to break the laws, influence national politics, kill other people, expose plots, do what you need to do in order to keep us protected, which frankly most countries have, including the one we all live in. And it's problematic, but it's there. We have Xavier keeping telepathic backups of people's personalities against their knowledge or will for many years, like just keeping your whole thoughts on file in a computer program, just in case I ever need to like put you in a new body. Which again,
not like he's ever done something that would call that into question before.
Is just bizarre.
That's an oversimplification, man. Come on, he's bringing it back to life.
We also have him willfully manipulating world events right now. There's a number of things going on. So in order to put X-Men on top, a lot of greater good conversations, without consulting anyone else on the planet, they've colonized Mars and claimed it as their own, right? We have all of these huge things taking place in the comics right now, which on a world scale, imagine China or Egypt or Cuba doing these types of things and how we would be reacting as civilians. So it's a really interesting concept. So we're focusing not on Krakoa itself, but just on Xavier. When I kind of wrap up those points in a bow, let's hear some of your thoughts. Brad, if you're willing to argue the greater good point here, or the positive side of Xavier.
Yeah. It's the culmination of how many times can we try to be secluded, try to mind our own business within your country, within your society, within your space, chase us down and you kill us and you kill our babies intentionally and brutally, before we just take the power, such as it is, into our own hands. I would be the first to argue that some of the decisions, like the formation of a CIA, are sus at best. But as far as Krakoa's sort of greater purpose of forming a safe place for mutants and benefiting the rest of the world while they do it, I solved most major diseases that we know of. And like basically the cost of it is to acknowledge us as a nation, let this be a safe place for your mutants as well. And even for the places that haven't, you have them, some of the shadier stuff that they're doing. The purpose of the Marauders, for instance, is providing life-saving drugs to even nations that haven't, that aren't willing to do that. 1 second, I have a child that's angry. Yeah, I would say Krakoa is, there has been some suspect decision making since the formation. That's kind of inherent to the thing itself, but overall, like, how can you blame them for making a place like this? What's the cost of paradigm?
Okay. Patrick, will you give us the counterpoint?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, so Krakoa, obviously comes out of this rather crushing revelation about the future, that mutants are always going to lose and humanity is always going to try and persecute them and succeed, essentially. And so it makes sense, where the basic idea of Krakoa comes from, that like this is our shot at creating the perfect nation, creating the golden future for all mutants. But I mean, in that process, Xavier and everyone else really have just kind of become complicit in the systems of the humans that they've been pushing back against this whole time. Whether it's any of these things we're talking about, especially X-Force. My God, every issue of X-Force is just like, Beast, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Oh, we know what he's doing.
Yeah, whatever he wants.
So X-Force proves you should never listen to Wolverine. Like, never take his advice on anything, because you'll take it way out there.
Yeah. So I mean, it's this fascinating case study in that the basic intention and the theory behind it is nice, but in the process, they're just kind of running rampant over the wishes and the realities and the agency of so many other people and nations and mutants as well. It's just the moral implications are pretty staggering.
Okay, who has thoughts on this? Professor X specifically in the Krakoa era.
I'm all for it. Yep. Because like the humans are talking about, oh, you colonized Mars, you weren't doing it. Like, you weren't thinking about it too. They had it.
It was open.
Right, it was wide open, and also all the
Oh, what's
humanity.
his name though? What's his name that just got introduced in X-Men? The new X-Men title. Has been
Fury?
thinking about
Oh
it for a
yeah,
while.
Phelan.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah, he's
Oh,
pissed.
yeah.
He's pissed.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. Oh, you gonna cry? Are you gonna cry?
The red
No, no,
face.
no, all right. I'm being serious. They got there first, and I'm sorry. Like, all right. What happened with Mars kind of reminds you of the space race, what America had with Russia, and whoever got there first. And if America was doing the exact same thing, America would do the exact same thing if they did. They even said in House of X, like, oh yeah, they're using leverage. God forbid, none of us would ever use that. So, like, and seriously, humans, they get mad no matter what they do. You know, hey, we have life-saving church. No, you're gonna oppress us. Really? If we wanted to oppress you, we would.
Go ahead.
Well, so this is a question that has sort of a lot of fronts, but I'm going to address one in particular, which is the inclusion of the villains, people who have unambiguously done a lot of bad, like Sinister and such. There's sort of two arguments here. One is that when you under these circumstances, some people who have historically been forces of antagonism or evil have proven themselves to be capable of great good. See Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
Another argument that I would like to call my Maleficent argument is, what would Sinister have done if he was not invited to the party?
Oh, he would have been mad that I see why they brought him, because you rather him, Mystique, Apocalypse, you need to keep those people around so you can keep an eye on them.
Keep them close.
To not.
And I mean, the alternative is, oh, well, what? We'll throw them all in the pit, everyone who's going to be a problem, or deal with them directly.
Mystique deserves to be in the pit.
So
one of the reasons that I love the X-Men so much, I'm going to go to queer theory here for just a minute, is we have people from all walks of life, from all religions, all countries, all socioeconomic statuses, all skin colors. It's just a percentage of the overall population who are born this way and united together. Now, just like in the real world, the white male stories tend to dominate all of the rest, right? Because that's the perspective.
Oh, really?
X-Men from always. But we have this idea of queer people being rejected in all society, particularly trans people. Cast aside, go live on an island somewhere so we don't have to see you. Keep your lives private, behind closed doors. We will attack you. We will hurt you. And that's one of the brilliant things about this Hickman run, is we have them claiming their power back in a way, right? Like it's brilliant breeding ground for storytelling, which I'm loving. So when we boil that down to the outcasts, when we've seen the trauma that's existed, he's seen the other futures in which worse trauma exists. The idea of the greater good in this concept, let's protect our own on our own terms and stop living closeted and live proud and out and love ourselves. That theory of it like makes me want to just like high five him, even though there's some morally questionable things happening around the bend. Any other thoughts on that?
Oh, real quick. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. What happened? Okay, I want to ask you guys this. What happened to Xavier 1 month after they started Krakoa?
He got shot in the head.
They shot him. And that's when they created X-Force. Because Charles was like, hey man, we're like, we're over here, they're over there, we can be over here. And then they basically ran into his house, killed a bunch of people at his party, and then him. Like, I'd be pissed. Like, if I would. But
humans stay proving Magneto right.
Yeah. And also with the mutants that who were supposedly mass murderers, you brought in Rogue, you brought in Mystique, you brought in Sabretooth, Wolverine. These are mass murderers as well. But like, you gotta give them some chance to grow. Apocalypse has been playing ball. He's like, I love this. Like, this is what I wanted.
Yeah.
The only one you don't trust, Sinister. That he needs to get club punched.
And
Like,
Beast.
No, he's so much fun.
Yes.
No, he's gonna burn it down. And Mystique, her and Destiny need to get bring back Mystique, have them get together, and then push both of them in the pit. Because you don't need.
They're so much fun.
They one time they succeeded. They're overachievers who can never get it. Can never make it. Can never win when it
Regina,
counts.
what were you
That's
gonna
true
say?
of
Go ahead.
Apocalypse, though.
Hey, Apocalypse is cool.
So when I think about Krakoa and I think about real life stuff, like we know, for example, America was founded by people who were enduring religious persecution, right? They came here so they could be away and they could be free to live how they wanted and have their own life. And what has that turned into? Holy fucking sharp balls, right? Like people, I don't think the larger public knows how much the CIA specifically, and I'm just going to reference this for a minute, has gone down specifically into Latin American countries and fucked up our governments there, introduced all of this shit there, and then we have all these people trying to flee here because of all the shit that we did there. I think that in theory, this creation of Krakoa is amazing. It's wonderful. We do have mutants who are finally exhibiting agency. They're free to be themselves. They're free to make families and be safe. Beak and his family, they were freaking murdered, and him and his wife had to run to Krakoa to be safe. But we also have Beast destroying an entire Latin American country. And I cannot tell you, I don't know if it's because I'm Hispanic. I don't know if it's because I'm a mother. I don't know why that particular story messed me up so much. But that has been my major stumbling point to actually really loving what Xavier has done, because I don't accept that you have to become like the oppressor in order to get shit done for your people. I can't accept that on any level. And Beast literally destroyed an entire country. Every man, woman, and child was destroyed by what he did there. And Xavier's like, okay, babe, it's all right. I ain't gonna tell nobody. No.
Don't tell nobody.
I ain't
Beast
telling
should
nobody.
have been sent into the pit.
Yep.
Like Xavier
he
protocols
should
are
have.
now, or the X-Force protocols are now. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, I understand, you're fighting for your survival. But how do you become the monster too? Like, your whole point of Krakoa is to not be the monster. You have invited Sinister and Selene and all of these terrible people, and you've given them a clean slate. And we can see that has actually been an advantage. But you cannot just excuse the murder, the genocide of an entire group of people. Like, that's the same thing that you're supposed to be fighting against. So this is the one sticking point with this whole thing. Like, Xavier, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, I love everything else that you've done, but this one thing, and you're not apologizing for it. You don't even feel bad. You're sleeping perfectly fine at night, and I'm not okay with that. You should at least feel bad.
So on one side on one side we have mutant pride, right? Like giving people a chance, protect the outcast, and on the other side we have the potential genocide of a whole country as an outlier. Where does Xavier lie on all of that? Anyone with any kind of final thoughts on this topic?
So I think, especially with Beast, I think that there is a lack of oversight in certain capacities that is surprising, especially with how much oversight is going into the larger structuring. With Beast, with Sinister, these are people that you should know better about. But I think real big picture, those two instances aside, the fact of what they're doing with Krakoa, what they're doing with Araco, what they're building towards, the humans are a distraction. Like, they're not trying to conquer the humans and kill the humans. They're trying to prepare for the end game. That's the powers of 10, like the real big threat. That's what they're building to. Them separating themselves is for their own survival. Humans, do whatever the hell you want. Hey, we'll even make you live longer. We'll make you live happier. But big picture, they're just trying to preserve themselves. With Beast and with Sinister, they're going a little bit far. With Sinister, I'm here for it. With Beast, I'm not. Get in the pit. But
Dr. Nemesis. No.
yeah. And so I'm loving everything else about the Hoxpox Krakoan era and what it is that they're building towards, and the fact that they are like, if you had your mind opened to that as a possibility, to Moira's 9 other lives and what was coming for you in whatever year it happens now, especially with Nimrod, that is something that you would be doing some other stuff for. It's just, there's a lack of trust about that with the people. There's not a lot of information going out to the general public of their community, and there's not any oversight where there should be.
Fantastic. Before we vote, I just want to say how amazing it is that we have like these 7 like educated humans so nerding out over this complex world that we love. It's so fun to connect with you guys. I'm loving this. Are we ready to vote on Xavier's role in Krakoa?
Yes.
Okay, Patrick, go first.
I'll give it a 4. A million snaps to what Regina just said, because it was like the opening argument that I tried to put together, and was like the much better, the more refined version of my opening argument. The comparison to like the founding of America and where America has gone since then is perfect.
Noelle?
I'll go 3.
Okay, Regina?
You know, I want to give him like a 3 because I think overall it's something wonderful, just like the X-Men, right? It's something wonderful that we get as a result. But man, Xavier is a bastard. I'm giving him a 4.
Justin?
I'm going 2. I think that, it could probably be 3 if we take into the fact that he should be doing more to prevent what is happening underneath his thumb. But I think in terms of his role and the fact that I'm just hopeful for the end game, it's 2.
Derrick?
I'm gonna go with 2 as well. I like, you got to remember, at the end of the day, all this is Moira's plan, and he trusts mutants. He wants to create a safe space for mutants. And what Krakoa has really shown is how the rest of the world really hates mutants, including the Avengers. Like, you always get the like remember at the gala, like, all those little microaggressions. Remember with Johnny Storm, he's like, "Oh my God, I don't know what's going on." Like, bro, calm down. It's not even that serious. Like, you want to talk about other people when you had to clap so much? It's basically an applause.
What's your vote, Derrick?
I'm going with 2.
Okay, and then Brad?
Absent of everything with Terra Verde, I would say 2, because it's mostly good, including Terra Verde. It's a 3. That's the bees. I don't blame him directly for that, but I blame him for lack of oversight.
Yeah.
He intentionally did not want to know anything that they did, and that's the result. That's what happens when you say, do whatever you think is necessary, morally questionable student of mine, and don't tell me what you're doing.
He trusts us, though.
I'm going to give this a 4, but I almost want to say 5 because I just know that in the next year or 2, we're going to get some crazy stories about all the shit we don't know about yet. There's so much to be revealed. And I know Xavier's going to be a giant asshole when it comes to these future stories, but we'll save it for now.
And Chad, can I just say one last thing? When they sent Mystique back to the Orca station, and then she came back, and of course she didn't succeed in her mission, and they're like, "Oh well, poor Irene's gonna stay dead." I was like, God, why are you such a dick? You're such a dick.
I wanted him pushed into the pit.
Regina, come on. Come on. Destiny? All right.
Replace Charles with Destiny. I'll like the stories better.
Oh, come on.
Okay. So we're going to ask the question from each of you before I give us the total scores. In what way has your perspective about Professor X changed today, if any? Justin, you willing to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I think, it's something that I was thinking at the beginning of this, going through the notes, in that we're talking about these 9 things that he's done that potentially cause, or definitely do cause, some alarm and some things to consider. But we also need to consider all the positive things that he's done otherwise. And I think that that's kind of a big thing to weigh. And I think it talks to the fact that people that are in charge of things and that are in positions of power, they have a lot of responsibility. They don't always make the best calls. Sometimes they make really terrible calls, but weighing that full range of experiences is part of that conversation. And, he's a jerk sometimes. He does some very morally questionable things. He allows some morally questionable things to happen. But at the end of the day, without him, we'd be in the age of apocalypse. So
the right.
Noelle.
I would say I still think pretty much about the same about him. Not a fan of Charles Xavier, but I can kind of incorporate some empathy in that for the trauma and the responsibility that he does have. I don't think he necessarily handles it well all the time, but it's something that I can remember when I'm reading stories about him.
Fantastic. Bradley.
I find his I typically find his mutant savior complex very exhausting, and and I just can't. I have trouble getting behind it. But the trauma that he's been in as a direct result of sort of his powers and I don't know, since childhood, it definitely does lend a different lens to this sort of complicated person who's just sort of fixing problems the only way they know how. Not for the better oftentimes, but he's I don't know. I think the one thing you can say about Charles is that he's usually doing his best. It's just that his best is sometimes still morally reprehensible.
Patrick.
I think I've developed more empathy for him today. Again, just going back to early in our conversation where we were talking about, having that power just available to you, and how does that change the entire way you interact with the world, and how easy is it to just make some of these, morally reprehensible decisions we've been talking about. Still not a big fan overall, as I think my ratings have probably suggested. But, clearly there are worse people who could be leading the mutant world, and a lot worse outcomes that could have resulted.
Derrick.
Overall, he's problematic. He's strictly problematic. I give him a 3. He's like kind of like what everybody's been saying. Like he's a good person, but his ego is huge. Yeah. One thing that we didn't talk about was back in AVX when he confronted Cyclops, and all he did was goad him. He's like, "You're such a disappointment." Like, are you serious? He's the best one who ever. He's doing the best with it, and you're telling that he's a bad guy because you listen to Captain White. No, sorry. Sorry.
Don't apologize.
What has stood out to me today most in a weird way is I'm picturing the X-Men writers that we all love so much sitting down. We just talked for nearly 3 hours about Professor X alone, and every character in this universe has similar complications and lengthy histories. And as they're weaving these storylines with like dozens of characters and so many people passionate about these characters, like they've got fucking hard jobs as they like, what would Professor X do in this situation? If Storm did that and Rogue did this? I mean, there's so much going on. It makes me totally respect the process even more because he's really fucking complicated. Mm-hmm. That said, I don't know of anyone who has Professor X even on their top 10 of favorite X-Men characters list.
He's in top 20. He's in the 20. Okay, you gotta respect it. Or he's exempt.
Well, while we were giving these answers, I just totaled the score. Out of the different categories, he got the worst ratings in the Enslavement of Danger as our collective score. And he got the lowest rating in the Child Army category, which is really
because we just all want more of these stories.
Yeah, we just love the book.
So the higher the score, the bigger the jerk he is, or the more evil he is. There's given all of our votes in all of the categories, there's a possible score of 280 points.
Wow.
He scored 195, which means he is 70% asshole.
So like most of us.
That is our conviction. You guys, this has been so much fun. Regina, what were you gonna say? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, when we started this, and just from the outline that you gave us, I was like, well, it's going to be fives all around.
Yeah, same.
So
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
after this discussion, when I first started reading, I think most of my exposure of Xavier at that point had just been through the animated series, because I didn't start reading until after the Fatal Attractions had been out for a little while. And, I think the animated series is like the idealized version of Xavier, right?
Mhm.
So it's like all the best parts of him without the negatives. And then when I went back and started reading again, I was like, what the hell? Especially way back in the early days. And he has done some questionable things. But overall, I think today has given me a new appreciation for some of the things that he's had to go through, for some of the choices that he's made. Even though I disagree with him a lot, he is a major asshole.
Charles
There is
Xavier
still a
is
lot to
jerk,
recommend to
poet
him.
laureate, Kitty
Yes.
Pryde.
Kitty Pryde is
I think that
very problematic.
I think there's a reason that he does engender such loyalty from the X-Men, and it's not just because they're being mind controlled. Right?
It's also really standing out to me too that when writers are telling X-Men stories, it's a really fun story to go back and like, let's reveal this shitty thing about Professor X and see how everyone reacts. Like that's it's kind of a common trope in the X-Men comics we're realizing, but God, is it fun.
It's like, can you top this?
So you guys, this has been so much fun. What a wonderful way to spend a Sunday afternoon. We're going to be airing this in a couple of weeks. I'll keep all of you in your notes, and I look forward to collaborating with each of you in the future. As we wrap up here, please remind everybody what your personal work is and where people can find you in social media. So I guess we're calling on people. Derrick, go ahead.
1407 Graymalkin. I'm on YouTube. Working on a bunch of really great stuff. I'm especially this video project called Why Chris Claremont is a Hack.
Bradley, where can people find you and tell them what you're doing?
So you can find me on Twitter at Knife System. That's KNIFESYSTEM, and Twitter and Instagram at Bradley A. Clayton. Either one of those. I'm posting artwork, chit-chatting, doing all that.
Patrick.
I'm at Never Ending X-Men. That's my Instagram diary of my X-Men read through. And if you like horror movies, check out my horror movie podcast, Every Horror Movie on Netflix. That's at EHMON Cast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And Noelle?
You can follow my podcast, X-Men Unraveled, wherever you listen, and Instagram at X-Men Unraveled.
And Justin?
We are, Alicia, my wife, and I are the Ex-Wife podcast. That's X-wife, not former wife. So that is educational for trying to turn new readers into experienced X fans. And it's been working. At the Ex-Wife podcast on all your social medias.
And Regina?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at the Red Queen of X. You can also find our podcast, House of X Podcast, on most major platforms and on Twitter and Instagram as well. We also do have a couple of videos up on YouTube regarding social justice issues, so you can check us out there, also at House of X Podcast. And it has been really great and fun talking to you all today.
Lastly, my social media, we have Graymalkin Lane, new episodes airing every Tuesday. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the rest. We are on Twitter at Graymalkin P for podcast, and on Instagram at Graymalkin Podcast as well. You guys, this has been so much fun. Thank you. Have a beautiful Sunday night, and we'll see you next time. We'll do another trial again sometime.
All right.
Sounds
Thanks.
good. Thanks.
Bye.
Good, everybody.
Bye.